Every 20 minutes, look about 20 feet away and hold your gaze there for 20 seconds. That is the whole rule. That is the whole prescription. You have probably heard it. A great many of you have tried it. It sits on nearly every eye doctor's website. It gets printed in the little wellness pamphlets they hand out where people work. And it very likely lives somewhere inside the settings of the very device you are using right now. Look far, rest your eyes, go back to work. Everybody nods. Everybody goes home feeling they have done something sensible. And I have to tell you, it sounds airtight. It sounds like exactly the kind of advice you would trust. You spend the whole day forcing your eyes to lock onto something close, a page, a panel of glowing letters a foot and a half from your nose, so of course you should give them a little holiday at a distance now and then. The logic is clean. The advice feels responsible. It feels like the sort of thing your grandmother would have told you if your grandmother had known about it. So here is the trouble. In 2023, some researchers decided to actually check. Not to argue about it, not to guess, but to measure. 432 people. They took folks who followed this rule and folks who did not, and at the end they scored how much strain, how much ache and blur and tiredness these people felt in their eyes. And the numbers came back. The people who did the rule scored 10.8. The people who ignored it entirely scored 10.3. That is not a difference. That is noise. The little statistic they used to ask whether two numbers are really different at all came out at 0.53. Which in plain speech means these two groups might as well be the same group. The rule, written the way everyone writes it, did nothing you could detect. Nothing. Now I want you to sit with that for a moment, because it is a strange thing. Here is a piece of advice repeated by millions of people, endorsed by serious professional organizations, and when you put it on the table and poke it, it falls over. And the natural reaction, the reaction I would expect from any thinking person, is to say, well then the whole thing is nonsense, throw it out. But that is not right either, and this is the part that makes this whole business worth 3 hours of your evening. Because the rule is not one idea. It is 3 numbers stitched together, and they do not all have the same pedigree. The 20 feet, the distance part, that one is real. That one is carved right out of the honest physics of how your eye bends light and changes its own shape to do it, and I am going to show you exactly why 20 feet and not 10 and not 50 is the magic distance. There is beautiful machinery hiding in there. But the 20 seconds, that number did not come from an experiment. It did not come from measuring anybody's eyes. It came from one optometrist standing in a corporate conference room somewhere around 1991 with a slide projector and a good instinct. No controlled trial behind it. No physiological study. Just a number that felt about right and got repeated and repeated until it hardened into something people mistook for a law of nature. So we have a puzzle. Part of this rule is grounded in genuine optics, and part of it is grounded in a nice round number somebody liked. And the job tonight is to pull those apart, carefully, gently, and see what is actually true. Because underneath all of it there is a muscle inside your eye, a muscle you have never once felt move. You cannot flex it on purpose, you cannot sense it working. It has been working since the moment you opened your eyes this morning, adjusting, straining, holding, and you have never had the faintest sensation of it. And nearly everything we are going to talk about comes down to what that little muscle is doing, and what it actually takes to make it let go. Let me set the stage, because the scale of this thing is genuinely something. How much time do people spend staring at close glowing surfaces now? The average American adult, as of late 2024, spends 7 hours and 2 minutes a day looking at a screen. 7 hours. That is not counting sleep, that is waking hours, and a big fraction of them are spent with the eyes locked at reading distance. The global average is not far behind, about 6 hours and 54 minutes a day, and that figure has climbed more than 8% in about a decade. And the young people, the ones we sometimes call Gen Z, they are running near 9 hours a day. 9 hours of near work. I want you to imagine telling an eye doctor from a century ago that ordinary people would spend more than half their waking life with their focus jammed to a point a foot and a half in front of their faces. He would not have believed you. He would have thought you were describing some rare and cruel occupation. And the eyes, predictably, complain. There is a name for the bundle of complaints. They call it computer vision syndrome, which is a grand name for a very ordinary misery. Blurred vision, dry, gritty eyes, redness, headache. And how common is it? A big review in 2023 gathered up 103 separate studies, more than 66,000 people all told, and pulled the numbers together. 69% of people using screens report these symptoms. Among university students, it climbs to about 76%. Among workers, roughly 69%. Even among children and teenagers, it sits around 50%. So this is not a fringe complaint. This is most of us. Most of the people staring at glass all day are feeling it in their eyes. And so along comes this simple, friendly little rule, 20 and 20 and 20, and it promises relief, and people cling to it precisely because the problem is so widespread and the fix sounds so easy. And I do not want you to hear me sneering at it. I am not sneering. The people who came up with it were not fools, and the people who follow it are not fools. There is real wisdom buried inside it. The trouble is that the wisdom and the folklore got mixed together in the same three-word phrase, and nobody stopped to sort out which was which. That is what we are going to do. Slowly, without hurrying. I want to take this apart the way you would take apart a good watch, laying each piece on the felt where you can see it, turning it over, understanding what it does before you decide whether to keep it. And by the time we are through, you are going to understand your own eye better than most people who wear glasses their whole lives ever do. You are going to know why distance relaxes something inside you and closeness tightens it. You are going to know why a muscle you cannot feel gets stuck. You are going to know why a drug used since ancient times to widen the pupils turns out to prove the whole mechanism true. And you are going to understand, finally, whether looking 20 feet away for 20 seconds really undoes what a day of screens does to your eyes, or whether the truth is a little more demanding than that. But before any of that, we have to start where all optics starts. We have to start with light coming into the eye and getting bent. Because your eye is, when you strip away all the biology and the wet tissue and the poetry, a camera. A very good camera. An astonishingly good camera that you grew yourself without reading any instructions. And like any camera, its entire job is to take rays of light that are spreading out from the world and to bend them, to steer them so they all come to a sharp little point on a screen at the back. And the amount of bending a lens can do has a number attached to it, a way of measuring focusing power, and when you add up all the bending power of a healthy human eye, you get one particular number. It is a bigger number than most people would guess, and every single thing about that 20-foot rule flows out of it. So let me ask you to picture the simplest possible thing. A point of light, far away, a single star out in the dark. The light leaves that star and comes to you across an enormous distance, and by the time it arrives after all that traveling, the rays are running very nearly parallel, side by side, like the long straight furrows in a plowed field seen from above. That is what light from far away looks like when it reaches your eye. Flat, parallel, calm. And your eye has to take those calm parallel rays and bend them hard down to a single point on the tissue at the back. That is the easy case, the restful case, and hold on to that picture of the plowed field, those quiet parallel rows of light. Because in a little while I am going to bring something close to your face, and you are going to watch those calm parallel rays turn into something your eye has to fight much harder to tame. And the muscle that does the fighting is the one you have never felt. Let us go and find it. Reach up, if you like, and touch the front of your own eye gently through the closed lid. You feel something smooth and firm and curved. That is the cornea, the clear front window, and it is doing most of the bending. Of the roughly 59 diopters of focusing power in a healthy eye, the cornea alone supplies about 43 of them. It is the big worker, the tireless one, and it never changes, never adjusts, never tires, because it is not a muscle at all. It is just a beautifully shaped piece of living glass, curved once at the factory and left that way for life. 43 diopters, fixed forever. That is the bulk of the job done before you have thought a single thought. But 43 is not 59. There is a gap, there is a remainder. Something inside has to supply the other 16 or so diopters, and unlike the cornea, that something has to be able to change its mind. Because the world is not all far away. Sometimes the star is a book. Sometimes the star is a face across the dinner table. Sometimes the star is your own hand held up close to examine a splinter, and every one of those distances demands a slightly different amount of bending. The cornea cannot help you there. It gives what it gives and not a diopter more. So nature, being clever, put a second lens behind the first one and made that second lens adjustable. That second lens is the crystalline lens, and it sits just behind the colored part of your eye, the iris, tucked in there in the dark, where you will never see it and never feel it. It is about the size of a small lentil, clear as spring water in a young person, and it is soft. That softness is the whole secret. The cornea is hard and fixed, the lens is soft and willing, and a soft clear thing can be squeezed into a fatter shape or stretched into a thinner one, and when you change its shape, you change how hard it bends light. Fat lens, strong bending, near focus. Thin lens, gentle bending, far focus. That is the entire trick of seeing at different distances, and it happens dozens of times a minute, silently, without your permission and without your knowledge. Now, who does the squeezing? Here is where it gets strange, and here is the muscle I keep promising you. Around that soft little lens runs a ring. Picture a circle of muscle, like the drawstring at the top of a cloth bag, or like the round mouth of a purse that pulls shut. That ring is the ciliary muscle, and it does not touch the lens directly. It is connected to the lens by hundreds of fine threads, fibers so thin they look like the guy wires holding up a tent, or the spokes running from the hub of a bicycle wheel out to the rim. Those threads have a name, the zonular fibers, but you can just think of them as the tent ropes. The ring of muscle on the outside, the soft lens in the middle, and the tent ropes stretched between them, holding the lens suspended in its place. Here is the part that fools almost everybody, and it fooled some very clever people for a very long time. You would think that to make the lens fatter, to focus up close, the muscle would have to pull. That is how muscles feel to us. We pull, we grip, we clench, we squeeze. Work means tension. But this ring does the opposite of what your intuition screams. When the ciliary muscle contracts, when it tightens down into a smaller ring, it moves inward toward the lens, and by moving inward, it loosens the tent ropes. It gives them slack. It stops pulling on them, and the moment the ropes go slack, the soft lens, which has been wanting to be round this whole time, springs into its fat, bulging shape all by itself. The muscle does not squeeze the lens fat. The muscle lets go, and the lens becomes fat on its own, the way a rubber ball you have been stretching snaps back to round the instant you release it. Sit with that a moment, because it is genuinely upside down from how a body ought to work. To look at something close, to read the small print, to thread a needle, your eye muscle has to contract and stay contracted. Effort. Continuous, held effort. And to look far away, off at the horizon, at the plowed field of parallel starlight, the muscle does nothing at all. It relaxes. It goes limp. The tent ropes pull taut again, they stretch the soft lens out flat and thin, and the eye settles into its resting shape, the shape it takes when nobody is asking it for anything. Far away is rest. Close up is work. The horizon is where the muscle sleeps. I want you to really own this, because the entire mystery of that little rule, that 20-20-20 rule we started with, lives right here in this backwards muscle. When you spend 7 hours with a glowing rectangle 1.5 feet from your nose, you are asking that ring of muscle to hold its contraction for 7 hours. Not to move, not to pump, just to clench and stay clenched, hour after hour, the way your arm would feel if I asked you to hold a coffee cup out at arm's length and simply keep it there not moving all afternoon. At first, nothing. Easy. 10 minutes, still fine. But an hour in, that arm is trembling. 2 hours, it is screaming. And this muscle in your eye has no way to scream, because you have no nerve that reports its fatigue to you. There is no ache you can point to. There is no soreness. You cannot feel it at all, any more than you can feel your own liver. It just works and holds in total silence. That silence is the trap. If your bicep is tired, you set the cup down. Your body tells you loudly and you obey. But the ciliary muscle files no complaint. It is smooth muscle, the involuntary kind, the same family as the muscle that squeezes food through your gut and the muscle that tightens your blood vessels. You did not learn to control it as a child the way you learned to walk or to close your fist. You cannot flex it on command right now no matter how hard you try. Go ahead and try. Try to relax your eyes focus by an act of will, the way you would relax a clenched jaw. You cannot find the handle. There is no handle. The wiring simply does not run that way. So what runs it if not your will? A nerve coming up from the deep old part of your nervous system, the part that also slows your heart and stirs your digestion and does 1,000 housekeeping jobs while you are busy thinking about lunch. It belongs to what the anatomists call the parasympathetic system, and that is a mouthful, so let me give you a plainer picture. Think of it as the quiet indoor crew of the body. There are two crews. One crew is for emergencies, for running and fighting and fright, the crew that widens your eyes and speeds your pulse when a dog lunges at you. The other crew is for calm, for resting and feeding and repairing, the crew that runs the house when the danger has passed. It is that second crew, the calm indoor crew, that reaches into your eye and tightens the ciliary ring to pull your focus in close. And notice the little irony hiding in that. The crew that is supposed to be about rest and calm is the very crew that holds your focusing muscle in its clench all day long. The relaxation crew, doing the tensing. When you settle down with a book or a screen, the calm crew fires up and squeezes the ring and holds the lens fat so the words stay sharp. It thinks it is helping you rest and read in peace. It does not know that you are going to sit there unmoving for 7 hours and that it will have to hold that grip the entire time, with no one telling it to stop, and no ache to force the issue. Here is the thing I find almost beautiful about the design, and also almost cruel. Because the resting state of the eye, the do-nothing state, the state where the muscle is fully relaxed, and the tent ropes are taut and the lens is flat, that state is tuned for far away. It is tuned for the horizon, for the hunt across the open plain, for the deer at the tree line and the storm on the far ridge. That is what the human eye was shaped for over an immense stretch of time, out under the open sky, looking mostly at things that were far off. Distance was the default. Distance was free. And near work, close fine detail work held a hand's breadth from the face, hour upon hour, day upon day, was simply not a thing that eyes were built to do for a living. We built that life for ourselves. We invented the close-up world. We made the page and the ledger and the fine needle and the workbench and then the glowing rectangle, and we moved the whole business of daily life in to about 1.5 feet from our noses, and we sat down in front of it, and we asked that silent backwards muscle to hold its clench for the length of a working day, 5 days a week, for decades. And the muscle, having no voice, does exactly as it is told. It holds. It holds until something goes quietly wrong. And when we finally lift our eyes to the far wall, and the far wall is blurred, we are shocked, because we never felt the strain that caused it. We never felt a thing. That blur, that moment when you look up from hours of near work, and the room across from you swims and will not sharpen, that is the muscle refusing to let go. It has been clenched so long it has forgotten how to release, the way a hand cramped around a pen can stay half curled after you set the pen down. The tent ropes want to pull the lens flat for distance, but the ring will not loosen to let them. And so the world far away, which should be the easy world, the restful world, the plowed field of parallel light, stays stubbornly out of focus. We are going to give that its proper name in a little while, and we are going to see how a certain famous drug dripped into the eye can force that stubborn ring to unclench in a way that tells us exactly what has been happening. But first, let me finally bring that thing close to your face as I promised and show you, ray by ray, what changes. Hold up a finger at arm's length and look at it. Somewhere out there, past your finger, is a wall or a window or a hillside if you are lucky. Now the light coming off that far wall, by the time it reaches your eye, is traveling in rays that are very nearly parallel. They have spread out so far from where they started that the fan of them has flattened into something like marching soldiers, all going the same way, shoulder to shoulder. Parallel light is the easy light. Your cornea and your relaxed lens, that fixed 43 diopters plus the 16, together they take those parallel rays and bend them down to a neat point on the back of your eye. No effort. The ring of muscle is loose. The tent ropes are taut. The lens is flat and thin, like a lens ground for a telescope. That is the plowed field, the restful world. But now bring the finger in. Slide it toward your nose slowly and watch what your eye has to do. The light from your fingertip has not had room to flatten out. It reaches your eye still spreading, still fanning outward like water from a hose held too close. Diverging, we say. And diverging light is harder light, because before your eye can bring it to a point on the retina, it first has to undo all that spreading and then bend it inward on top of that. The flat telescope lens cannot do it. The rays would come to their point somewhere behind your eye, in the bone of your skull, and on the retina itself you would see only a smeared blur. So the eye must become a stronger lens. It must add power. And you know now exactly how it does this. The ring tightens. The tent ropes go slack, and the lens, that clear little bag of protein that has wanted all along to be fat and round, finally gets its wish, and it bulges, and its power climbs 16 diopters, 17, 18, however many it needs, until the fanning light is tamed and pulled down to a point right where it belongs. Here is the number that matters. If you bring that finger to about 10 centimeters from your eye, roughly the width of your hand, a healthy young eye must supply something like 10 extra diopters of power to see it sharply. 10 diopters. Remember that at 20 feet the demand was 1/6 of a single diopter. So small we called it nothing, we called it infinity. And at a hand's width from your face, the same eye is asked for 10 whole diopters. That is the range the ciliary muscle has to cover, from nearly nothing to 10. And it covers it by squeezing, and the squeezing is work, and the work does not stop as long as the finger or the page or the glowing rectangle stays close. Now think about what you actually do with your day. You do not hold your finger to your nose for 8 hours. But you hold a screen at 1.5 feet, at 2 feet, and light from 2 feet arrives diverging, demanding maybe a diopter and a half, 2 diopters of accommodation. Not the full 10, but not 0 either. Not rest. And the difference between a little work and rest, held for 7 hours and 2 minutes, which is what the average grown person now spends looking at screens in a day, or 9 hours if you happen to be young, that difference is the whole story. Because muscle does not mind a hard effort that ends. Muscle minds a small effort that never ends. Ask anyone who has held a tray steady at a party, or kept their arm up to wave at a train that took too long to leave. It is not the weight that gets you, it is the not putting it down. So the ring holds. A diopter and a half, hour after hour, and the ring holds it. And smooth muscle, this involuntary kind, is very good at holding. It does not tire and quit the way the muscle in your calf will quit when you climb too many stairs. It is built to sustain, to keep the gut moving and the vessels toned and the airway set, quietly, for a lifetime without ever reporting in. That is a gift when it keeps your insides running. It is a curse when it means the one muscle you most need to relax is the one muscle that has no intention of telling you it is tired, and no habit of letting go on its own. And while all this is going on behind the colored part of your eye, something else is going wrong out front, on the very surface, and it is going wrong for a reason that has nothing to do with lenses at all. It has to do with blinking. Watch a person who is not doing anything in particular, someone gazing out a window, someone listening to a friend. They blink, on average, about 22 times a minute. A little sweep of the lids, a little flood of tears wiped clean across the eye over and over more than once every 3 seconds, and they have no idea they are doing it. It is one of those things the body handles without asking you. Now hand that same person a book and sit them at a table to read. The blinking slows. It drops to about 10 times a minute, less than half. The reading has captured them, and the body, in its strange economy, decides that keeping the eyes still and open on the words matters more just now than keeping them wet. And then, last, sit that person in front of a glowing screen full of text and count again. 7. 7 blinks a minute, where there were 22, nearly a 70% collapse. This was measured carefully in a study of 104 office workers, and it is one of the quietest, strangest facts about what we do to ourselves all day. We stop blinking, and we never notice we have stopped. It gets a touch worse, and here is the second turn of the screw. Not only do you blink less, but the blinks you do manage are worse blinks. A proper blink is a full one. The upper lid comes all the way down and meets the lower lid, and in that meeting it drags a fresh sheet of tears across the entire cornea, top to bottom, corner to corner, like a squeegee taking a full clean stroke down a pane of glass. But a hurried, distracted, half-hearted blink, the kind you make when most of your attention is out there in the screen and only a sliver is left over for housekeeping, that blink does not close all the way. The lids flutter partway and open again, and a squeegee that only travels halfway down the glass leaves the bottom third streaky and dry. At rest already, something like 8 in 10 blinks are a little incomplete. Sink into a screen and that climbs to better than 9 in 10. So the lower third of your cornea, the part a lazy blink never reaches, sits exposed to the air, and the thin film of tears that is supposed to protect it thins and pulls apart and dries. We can even watch that film fail as the day wears on. There is a measurement for how long the tear layer stays smooth and unbroken after a blink before it begins to split apart into dry patches. In office workers, first thing in the morning, that time is a little over 9 seconds. By evening, after a full day of screens and stingy blinking, it has fallen to under 7. The film that was steady for 9 seconds now cracks apart in less than 7. Which means that between one thin blink and the next thin blink there is a stretch where the surface of your eye is simply drying in the open air. That is the grit, the sting, the redness, the feeling toward the end of a long day that you would like to just close your eyes and hold them closed. That is not your imagination. That is a measurable film coming apart on a measurable clock. So now we have 2 separate injuries stacking up, and it is worth keeping them apart in your mind, because they are genuinely different machines breaking in genuinely different ways. Behind the iris, the ciliary muscle is locked in its small, endless effort, refusing to release, and that is a muscle problem. A problem of accommodation, a problem of the lens being held fat when it wants to lie flat. Out on the surface, the tear film is evaporating because the lids have quit doing their job, and that is a plumbing problem, a wetting problem. Nothing to do with muscles or lenses at all. And on top of both of those, humming underneath everything, the screen itself is flickering at you. Its picture is redrawn 60, perhaps 120 times a second, and each redraw is a tiny pulse of brightness. Your eye cannot consciously see that flicker. The point at which flicker blurs into a steady glow, what we call the critical fusion frequency, sits somewhere around 30 to 50 times a second for most people, and the screen ticks along above that, so it looks perfectly steady to you. But steady to your awareness is not the same as steady to your visual system. Underneath the level where you notice that stuttering light is still arriving in pulses, and the machinery that processes it is still being nudged 60 times a second all day long, a sub-threshold drumbeat of stress you will never feel and cannot switch off. Put the 3 together. A muscle that will not unclench. A surface that will not stay wet. A light that will not hold still. Hold all 3 for 7 hours, or 9, and multiply it across nearly everyone you know, and you begin to see why, when researchers gathered 103 separate studies covering better than 66,000 people, they found that roughly 69% of screen users, better than 2 in every 3, were walking around with some color of these symptoms. Blurred vision, dry eye, redness, headache. Among university students, it ran higher still, past 76%. This is not a rare complaint of the unlucky few. This is very nearly the ordinary condition of a person with a screen and a workday, and almost none of them can name the muscle at the center of it, and not one of them has ever felt it move. So let me now tell you about a strange thing that can happen to a person who holds that clench too long. It is one of the quietest little tricks the body plays, and hardly anyone knows its name. Suppose you spend the whole afternoon reading or working close, pulling on that inner focusing muscle hour after hour, never letting it go. And then, at last, you lift your eyes. You look across the room, out the window, at the hills. And the hills are soft. They are blurred. The world at a distance has gone gently out of focus, as though someone smeared a thin film of grease across the far half of everything. And you think, my goodness, something has happened to my eyes. My eyes are going. But nothing has happened to your eyes, not to their shape, not to their length, not to a single tissue in them. What has happened is that the muscle got stuck. That ring of tiny fibers around the lens, the one you have never once felt, has been contracting so long that it has, in a manner of speaking, forgotten how to let go. It stays bunched up. It keeps the lens fat and bulging, tuned for the near thing, when now you are asking it for the far thing. And a fat lens aimed at a faraway hill throws the picture in front of the retina instead of on it, and the hill goes soft. The doctors have a name for this. They call it accommodative spasm, or sometimes pseudomyopia. That second word is the honest one, pseudo, meaning false, false nearsightedness. It looks exactly like the real thing, the genuine nearsightedness where the eyeball has grown too long from front to back. It gives the same blur, the same soft distance, the same reach for glasses. But it is a counterfeit. There is no change in the length of the eye at all. There is only a cramp in a muscle you cannot find, cannot flex on purpose, and cannot rub the way you would rub a knot out of your calf after a long walk. I find that a wonderful and slightly unsettling thing to sit with. You can have a muscle in a full-blown cramp, hard as a clenched fist, and have no sensation of it whatsoever. If you cramped your hand shut like that and it would not open, you would howl. You would feel it screaming from your knuckles to your wrist. But this little ring in your eye can lock itself down for hours and send you not one whisper of complaint. All it sends you is a blurry world, and even that it lets you blame on your poor tired eyeballs rather than on itself. It hides. It does its work in the dark and takes none of the credit and none of the blame. Now, how do the doctors break such a spasm when it gets bad enough that a person comes in worried and cannot shake it? Here is where the story gets rather beautiful, because they reach for a bottle of drops, and the drops contain a drug, and the most famous of these drugs is one called atropine. And atropine is old. This is not some clever modern invention. This is a substance squeezed out of nightshade plants, deadly nightshade, belladonna, a poison known and feared and used for hundreds and hundreds of years. Ladies once put it in their eyes on purpose to make their pupils go wide and dark and dreamy, which is where that name belladonna, beautiful lady, comes from. And what atropine does when you put a drop of it in the eye is it walks up to the nerve endings that tell the focusing muscle to contract, and it blocks them. It sits in the doorway. The signal to clench comes down the nerve, arrives, and finds the door jammed shut. It cannot get through. And so the muscle, receiving no more orders to squeeze, has no choice. It lets go. It goes slack. It relaxes all the way out. And I want you to notice what that means, because it is the quiet hinge that the whole rest of this talk swings on. When the doctor forces that muscle to release with a chemical, the eye settles into exactly, precisely, the same relaxed state it settles into when you look at a faraway hill. The drug and the distance produce the very same result. One does it by poisoning the doorway of the nerve. The other does it by simply removing the demand, by giving the eye something so far off that there is nothing left to focus on and no reason to pull. The drop is a sledgehammer. The far gaze is a feather. But they land in the same place. That tells you, as surely as anything in this business can, that the mechanism we have been circling is the true one. It really is that little parasympathetic nerve, that involuntary wiring, holding the focusing muscle in its grip. Prove it two completely different ways and get the same answer, and you can start to trust the answer. So hold on to that. Keep it in your pocket, because we are about to go looking for where the famous rule came from, the rule you have heard 100 times. And we are going to find that the physics under one part of it is solid as bedrock, and the rest of it is, well, let us just say it was written on a napkin and no one ever checked. Come with me then to a corporate conference room, sometime around the year 1991. I do not know the exact color of the carpet, so I will not pretend to. But I can tell you the shape of the moment. There is a man at the front, an optometrist, a doctor of the eye, named Jeffrey Anshell. And he is doing what people in his line of work were just beginning to do in those years. He is standing up in front of office workers, people who sat all day at the new machines with the glowing screens, and he is trying to teach them how to keep their eyes from aching. Computer vision stress, they were starting to call it. The complaints were pouring in. And a good teacher, faced with a room of tired working people, does not hand them a physics lecture. He does not stand there and derive the divergence of light in diopters. He gives them something they can remember on the drive home, something with a rhythm to it, something that sticks. And so he reached for a little chime of a phrase. Every 20 minutes, look at something 20 feet away for 20 seconds. 3 20s. It has a beat, doesn't it? It rolls off the tongue. You could put it on a poster. You could say it once and have it lodged in someone's head for the rest of their life, which frankly is exactly what happened. He later put it in a book on visual comfort in the workplace, published near the end of that decade, and from there it went everywhere. Until now, you cannot walk through a discussion of tired eyes without tripping over it. But here is the thing I want you to hold very gently, without any anger about it, because there is nothing to be angry about. That rule was never an experiment. Nobody sat down with two groups of people and tested 20 seconds against 10 or 20 minutes against 30 and measured which came out better. It was a clinical rule of thumb. It was a wise man's guess, dressed in a memorable rhythm so that ordinary people would actually do it. And Anshell himself, to his great credit, has said as much. He has said plainly that it was never meant to be handed down as unshakable scientific truth. It was meant to get busy people to look up from their work now and then. That is all. That is an honorable thing for a rule to be, but it is a very different thing from a law of nature. Now, one piece of it, one single piece, is grounded in the hard physics we have been building all along. The 20 feet. That part is real. We worked it out together already. Get a thing 6 meters off or more, and the focusing demand on your eye drops to about 1/6 of a diopter, a sixth of that basic unit of focusing power, and that is so close to nothing that no eye doctor's kit even carries a lens fine enough to correct for it. The smallest step they stock is bigger than the demand itself. So the eye, standing at 20 feet, is essentially standing at infinity. The muscle can let all the way go. That number, the 20 feet, is not a guess. It falls right out of the optics. It could not really have been much different. But the other two 20s, the 20 seconds, the 20 minutes, those, my friends, are music, not measurement. They were chosen because they rhymed with the first 20, because 3 of a thing is easier to hold in mind than 2 different numbers and an odd one. There is no study underneath the 20 seconds telling us that a muscle in a long cramp needs precisely that long, and no more, to fully release and reset. There is no experiment marking out 20 minutes as the exact moment the strain becomes worth interrupting. Somebody could just as well have said 15 or 30, and it would have sounded just as authoritative on the poster. The rhythm did the persuading. The rhythm always does. And so we arrive at a genuinely uncomfortable question. The kind I like best. The kind that makes the settled thing wobble. If 2 of the 3 numbers were chosen for their sound and not their science, then does the rule actually work? Does doing it, faithfully, 20 seconds every 20 minutes, all day long, actually leave your eyes better off than not doing it at all? You would think, wouldn't you, that a rule this famous, this universally repeated, endorsed by the great professional bodies of eye doctors, printed on handouts in every waiting room, would have mountains of proof behind it. You would assume someone, long ago, must have measured it and found it good. Well, let us go and look at what happens when somebody finally did. So, somebody did. In the year 2023, a group of researchers gathered up 432 people, ordinary people with a mean age of about 26. the very generation soaking in screen light from morning until the small hours, and they asked a plain question. Of these people, who follows the famous rule and who does not, and does it make one lick of difference to how their eyes feel at the end of a day? Now, this is exactly the kind of study I love, because it does not care about the poster. It does not care how good the words sound lined up in a row. It just measures. It takes the tired eyes of real human beings and it puts a number on the tiredness. They used a scale for what the doctors call asthenopia, which is a grand old word that simply means eye strain, the ache and the blur and the grit that builds up behind your eyes when you have been staring too long and too close. Higher number, more misery. Lower number, more comfort. Simple as weighing potatoes. And here is what they found, and I want you to sit with it, because it is quieter than you expect. The people who practiced the rule had an average misery score of about 10.8. The people who did not bother with it at all had an average score of about 10.3. Let that settle. The ones doing the famous thing, the ones dutifully glancing away every 20 minutes, felt very slightly worse, on average, than the ones ignoring it entirely. Not worse in any way that means anything. The difference is a whisker, a rounding error, a puff of wind. When they ran the arithmetic that tells you whether a difference is real or just the ordinary jostle of chance, they got a number, and the number was 0.53. In this line of work, when that number climbs up past 0.05, you are supposed to shrug and say the difference could easily be nothing at all. 0.53 is not near the line. It is nowhere near the line. It is in another county. It is the statistical equivalent of a coin landing heads and everyone agreeing that tells you nothing about the coin. So there it is, the most repeated piece of eye advice in the modern world, endorsed, printed, memorized, and when a careful team finally set it against a group who never touched it, the two groups were, for all practical purposes, the same. I find that thrilling, actually, and I want to be careful about why. It is not thrilling because the rule is a fraud. It is not a fraud. It is thrilling because it is such a clean lesson in how a thing can be popular and gentle and well-meant and still not survive its first honest look. That is the whole game of figuring out nature. You do not get to keep a belief because it is comforting or famous. You keep it only if it holds up when you try sincerely to knock it down. Now, before we go burying this rule too fast, I owe it a fair hearing, because there is a wrinkle in that same study, and the wrinkle matters. Of all those 432 people, how many actually did the rule? Not many. Fewer than you would guess. Only about a third of them practiced it at all, and when you look closely, only about 8 or 9 out of every 100 did it regularly. The rest, about a quarter of the group, did it now and then when they remembered, which with a rule like this means almost never. So a skeptic could stand up and say, wait, you have not really tested the rule. You have tested a room full of people who mostly are not doing it, and a tiny handful who sort of are. And that skeptic would have a point. This is the trouble with studying advice that lives or dies by whether people bother to follow it. You are never quite measuring the rule. You are measuring human forgetfulness wearing the rule's clothing. But hold on, because that wrinkle cuts both ways, and this is where it gets interesting. Suppose the rule were powerful. Suppose 20 seconds at a distance really did wash the strain out of your eyes the way the poster promises. Then even that small faithful handful, the 8 or 9 in 100 who did it regularly, ought to have stood out. They ought to have shone. Their misery scores ought to have dropped below the crowds, visibly, unmistakably, the way people who actually take a working medicine get better while the others stay sick. And they did not. They blended right in. A genuinely strong effect does not hide behind low compliance. It pokes through. The fact that nothing poked through tells you that whatever the rule is doing, if it is doing anything, it is doing it softly. And this is not the only place the numbers go limp. There was another study, a different design, where researchers took the very heart of the rule, the intervals, and they varied them on purpose. They had people break every 5 minutes, or every 10, or every 20, or every 40, and then they watched. They measured how fast people could read, how accurately they read, how strained their eyes felt across all these different schedules. and the schedules, when you laid the results side by side, told the same flat story. No meaningful difference in reading speed. None in reading accuracy. None in the eye strain that mattered. Break every 5 minutes or break every 40, and the eyes came out about the same. Which means the sacred middle number, the 20 minutes, the interval that half the world can recite in its sleep, is not sitting on any special hill. There is no evidence that 20 is the magic gate. It was, as I said, a number chosen because it rhymed with its neighbors, and the rhyme, it turns out, was doing the heavy lifting all along. Now I can feel a certain unease creeping into the room, the kind of unease that keeps a person awake when they would rather drift off, so let me soothe it, because the story is not as bleak as it sounds, and it is far more interesting than mere debunking. We have not learned that looking into the distance is useless. We have learned something much sharper and much more specific. We have learned that the physics underneath the rule, the beautiful part, the part about optical infinity and the muscle that finally lets go, all of that is still standing, untouched, solid as ever. Nothing in these studies knocked over a single diopter of the optics. 6 meters away is still optical infinity. The ciliary muscle still relaxes when you gaze at the far wall. Atropine still does chemically what distance does naturally. All of that remains exactly as true as it was an hour ago. The optics never signed up to defend the rule. The optics were only ever describing what happens in one instant, when your eye finds something far away and the tension drains out of that little ring of muscle. What the studies actually put on trial was not the physics. It was the recipe. It was the specific claim that a 20-second sip of distance, taken every 20 minutes, adds up to a healthy dose. And that, my dear listener, is a question of arithmetic, not of optics, and arithmetic is a merciless auditor. Because think about what 20 seconds out of 20 minutes really is. 20 minutes is 1,200 seconds. Your 20-second glance is 20 of those. Do the division, and you find you are spending about 1.5% of your working time with your eyes at rest. 1.5%. The other 98.5%, your eye is still hauling on that muscle, still bent close to the glowing rectangle, still drying out between its two rare, too shallow blinks. You have given a parched garden a single teaspoon of water and told it to be grateful. And so a new suspicion begins to form, the way the best suspicions do, slowly from the edges inward. Maybe the rule does not fail because its idea is wrong. Maybe it fails because its dose is tiny. Maybe you cannot undo 7 hours of sustained strain with a scattering of 20-second glances any more than you can undo a week of no sleep with a series of 1-minute naps. The direction is right. The muscle really does want the distance, but the amount, the quantity, the sheer number of seconds actually delivered may be so far below what the eye needs that the whole gesture washes out into the noise, into that flat indifferent number, 0.53. Which raises the obvious next question, the one that is going to carry us forward through the dark, gentle hours still ahead. If 20 seconds is not enough, then how much is? What is the real dose? What does the eye actually require to unlock that hidden muscle and let it truly rest? Let us go and find out what the physiology, and not the poster, has to say about it. So let us actually go looking for the number, the way you would go looking for the right amount of water for a plant that keeps wilting. You have been giving it a thimbleful at noon and wondering why the leaves droop by evening. And the honest answer, the one that comes from watching how eyes behave rather than from watching a slide in a conference room, is that the eye seems to want something much larger than a thimbleful. When people who study the way the growing eye responds to visual signals go looking for a stretch of faraway gazing that actually leaves a measurable fingerprint, they do not find it in seconds. They find it in minutes. The figure that keeps surfacing is about 5 continuous minutes every hour spent looking off at optical infinity. Not 5 minutes scattered into 15 little crumbs. 5 minutes in one unbroken pore. Long enough for the ciliary muscle to notice that the emergency is over, to stop clenching, to let the zonules pull the lens flat and hold it flat, and to simply sit there, idle, the way it was built to sit whenever you looked at a far hillside or a distant wall. Now put those two doses side by side and let them sit next to each other in the quiet. 20 seconds out of 20 minutes. Do that arithmetic gently. 20 minutes is 1,200 seconds, and 20 of those is a whisker under 2 seconds in every 100. Call it 1.5% of your working time spent letting the muscle go. Now take the other prescription. 5 minutes out of 60 is 1 part in 12, which is about 8.33% of your time. And there it is, plain as two glasses of different heights on a shelf. The physiology is asking for something like 5 times as much relief as the famous rule actually hands over. 5 times. That is not a rounding error. That is not a matter of a study being a little noisy. That is the difference between a splash and a soak. And it explains, without any villain and without any conspiracy, why that flat indifferent number came back to greet us. The rule was not lying about the direction, it was simply pouring a thimble where the eye was thirsty for a cup. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to swing too hard the other way and start sneering at the little rule, and that would be unfair and it would also be wrong. The direction encoded in it is genuinely correct. Every piece of the optics we have walked through says so. When you look 20 feet off, the vergence of the light coming into your eye has dwindled to something like 1/6 of a diopter, a demand so faint it slips underneath the smallest step any spectacle lens is even ground to correct, which is 1/4 of a diopter. So the eye, quite reasonably, treats 20 feet as though it were the far edge of the universe. The ciliary muscle, feeling almost no call to work, lets go. That part is not folklore. That part is as solid as the focal length of a magnifying glass. The trouble was never the where. The trouble was the how long and the how often. The poster got the compass bearing exactly right and then handed you a canteen with barely a mouthful in it and sent you across the desert. And you can feel, if you sit with it, why a busy clinician in the early 1990s would reach for 20 seconds rather than 5 minutes. Imagine standing in front of a room of people who work at screens all day, people with deadlines and impatient bosses and a stack of paper on the desk. You want to give them something they will actually do. You could tell them the physiologically generous truth, 5 unbroken minutes every single hour of staring away into the distance, and watch their faces close like shutters. Because who has that? Who will honor that? Who will stop the meeting to go gaze at a wall? Or you could give them something so small, so nearly free, that they cannot reasonably refuse it. 20 seconds. Anyone can spare 20 seconds. It is the difference between asking a friend to help you move a house and asking them to hold a door. The little dose was chosen, I suspect, not because it was enough, but because it was possible. And there is a real wisdom in that, a kind of tender realism about human beings and how little they will actually change. A tiny habit that people keep may do more good in the aggregate than a heroic habit that everyone abandons by Thursday. So I will not stand here and call the rule foolish. I will only say it was a compromise, and somewhere along the road we forgot the compromise part and started treating the small number as though it were the true number. But now let us follow the thirst, because the eye does not care about our meetings. What is it actually doing during those long unbroken hours that leaves it needing such a generous drink of distance? 2 separate things are going wrong at once, and they are worth keeping apart in your mind, like 2 different leaks in the same roof. The first leak is the muscle. The ciliary muscle we have been circling all night, held in a long, low contraction to keep the near thing sharp, hour after hour, until it forgets how to fully release, until distance itself goes soft and smeared because the lens will no longer flatten all the way. That is the accommodative side of the trouble. That is the leak the far gaze is meant to patch, and patch it can if you give it minutes instead of moments. The second leak has almost nothing to do with focusing at all, and this is the part people forget when they think the whole story is about the muscle. The second leak is the surface of the eye drying out. Remember what happens to blinking when you fall into a screen. At rest, in easy conversation, you blink something like 22 times a minute, a soft, steady windshield wiper you never think about. Set a book on the table in front of you, and the rate falls to about 10. Put glowing text on a screen, and it collapses further, down to roughly 7 blinks a minute in that study of office workers. That is around a 2/3 cut in the very mechanism that keeps your eye wet. And it gets quietly worse, because the blinks you do manage are more and more often only half blinks. the lid coming partway down and darting back up without ever sweeping the full surface. The share of those incomplete blinks climbs from about 4 in 5 at baseline to better than 9 in 10 during absorbed screen work. And an incomplete blink leaves the lower third of the cornea, the bottom slice of your own window, unwetted, so the tear film there thins and breaks and evaporates faster than it can be replaced. You can watch that surface fail over the course of an ordinary day. There is a measurement called the tear breakup time, which is just how many seconds a smooth film of tears can hold itself together over the open eye before it splits into dry patches. In office workers, it starts the morning at a little over 9 seconds and sags to under 7 by evening. The eye is drying from the inside of the workday outward, slowly, film thinning, patches opening, and every one of those dry patches is a small rough spot where the light no longer passes cleanly and the nerves begin to complain. So when your eyes feel like sand at the end of a long day, that gritty, hot, heavy feeling, that is not your imagination and it is not weakness. That is a literal, measurable failure of the tear film driven by a blink you stopped making because a screen swallowed your attention. And here is why the 2 leaks matter so much for our question about dose. A far gaze, all by itself, does a beautiful job on the first leak and does nothing at all for the second. You can look at a distant wall and relax the ciliary muscle completely, and your cornea will keep right on drying if you keep staring without blinking. The relief has to do 2 jobs. It has to unclench the muscle, which wants time, real minutes of it, and it has to restore the blink, which wants your attention broken, wants you to look away long enough that the automatic wiper switches back on and sweeps the surface wet again. 20 seconds barely touches either one. It is not long enough for the muscle to fully forget its contraction, and it is not long enough for more than 2 or 3 real blinks to rehydrate a surface that has been drying for 20 solid minutes. The dose fails on both counts at once, and now you can see it is not 1 problem, but 2, quietly conspiring, both of them starved by the same too small pore. So the shape of the real answer is starting to come up out of the fog, the way a shoreline comes up as a boat drifts in. It is going to be about minutes, not seconds. It is going to be about breaking the near work often enough and long enough that the muscle actually releases and the blink actually returns. And it is going to have to reckon with a scale of exposure that the people in that conference room in 1991 could scarcely have imagined, because the youngest among us now spends something like 9 hours a day inside the glow. 9 hours of sustained near demand poured onto a system that evolved to spend most of its waking life looking at the middle distance and the far. Against 9 hours, a scattering of 20-second glances is not medicine. It is a gesture. A kind, well-meant, almost superstitious gesture toward a muscle that is asking, quietly and without any sensation you can feel, for something far more substantial. Let us follow that muscle deeper still and ask what the eye reveals about itself when we borrow the chemist's tools and force it to relax whether it wants to or not. Now, when I say we borrow the chemist's tools, I mean something very particular, and it has a long and slightly wicked history. There is a plant, deadly nightshade, and centuries ago there were women who would take a little juice from its berries and put a drop into each eye, because it made the pupil swell wide and dark and, so the fashion went, more beautiful. The Italian name for the plant carries that vanity right in it, the beautiful lady. What those women did not know, and what we know now, is that the active substance in that plant reaches into the eye and shuts off a particular set of nerve signals. We call the substance atropine. And atropine does 2 things at once. It widens the pupil, which is the part people noticed, but it also quietly, in the same stroke, paralyzes the little ring of muscle we have been circling around all this time. It freezes the ciliary muscle in the open, relaxed, flattened position. It will not contract. It cannot contract. The chemistry has taken the steering wheel and locked it at dead center. Think about what that means. We spent a good while establishing that when you look far away, the ciliary muscle lets go, the zonual threads pull the lens thin, and the eye settles into its lowest possible effort. That was the geometry doing it. The physics of light arriving from far off in nearly parallel rays, asking almost nothing of the lens. Now here comes a drop of a plant extract that produces the very same slack muscle, the very same thin lens, without any far-off object at all. You could be staring at a book 6 inches from your nose and your eye would refuse to focus on it, because the muscle that would have thickened the lens has been chemically told to stand down. The eye is relaxed for distance whether distance is there or not. I find this genuinely lovely, and here is why. It is a proof. It is a piece of evidence sitting right there in a doctor's little bottle. If someone doubted that looking 20 feet away relaxes the ciliary muscle, if they said, well, maybe the whole story about the muscle and the lens is just a fable we tell, you could answer them with atropine. Because atropine reaches in and touches exactly one thing, the parasympathetic signal to that muscle, and when it does, the eye behaves precisely as it behaves when you gaze at the horizon. Two completely different causes. A drug on one side and a distant mountain on the other, and they arrive at the identical result. A slack ring of muscle and a flat lens. When two different roads lead you to the same door, you can be fairly confident you have found the right door. The mechanism is real. The relaxation is real. And it lives on that one thin thread of nerve. The eye doctors use this on purpose and not for fashion. When a child comes in and needs a proper measurement of the eye, the doctor wants to know the true shape of that eye, the true focusing power, without the muscle secretly straining and throwing off the reading. A young eye is so strong, so eager, that its ciliary muscle can quietly pull in a few extra diopters during the exam and make the eye look different than it truly is. So the doctor puts in a cycloplegic drop, atropine or one of his gentler, shorter-acting cousins, cyclopentalate, tropicamide, and waits. The muscle goes slack. The hidden strain melts away. And now, with the muscle forcibly resting, the doctor can read the eye's real refractive state, the naked geometry underneath, uncontaminated by effort. They call this a cycloplegic refraction, and it is considered the gold standard precisely because it removes the muscle from the equation. They have, in effect, force the eye to look at optical infinity while it sits in a chair in a small dark room staring at a wall 2 feet away. And here is where the two halves of our story shake hands. Remember the locked muscle, the accommodative spasm, the eye that has been staring at the glow for hours and now cannot let go, so that the far wall goes soft and blurry as though the person had suddenly become nearsighted. What do the doctors reach for to break that spasm? The same drops, the very same cycloplegics. Atropine, cyclopentalate, tropicamide. They put a drop in and the chemistry does forcibly what the muscle would not do on its own. It cuts the parasympathetic signal, the muscle unclenches, the lens flattens, and the distance comes back into focus. It is a drug-induced version of exactly what a long look at the horizon accomplishes for free. The pharmacist's answer and the physicist's answer are the same answer written in two different languages. One uses a molecule to silence a nerve, the other uses parallel rays of light to give that nerve nothing to do. Both end in the same quiet, the same slack, the same rested muscle. So when your distance vision fogs a little after a long stretch at the screen and then clears if you stand up and look out a window for a while, you are running a small pharmacology experiment on yourself, except your drug is the far wall and the drifting clouds and the trees at the end of the street. You are administering optical infinity. No molecule, no bottle, no dilated pupil, no 6 hours of blur while the atropine wears off, just light from far away, arriving nearly parallel, asking the muscle for essentially nothing. Now I want to be careful and honest here, because there is a temptation to think that if a rested muscle is good, then a permanently rested muscle would be wonderful, and that is not so. You would not want to walk around all day on atropine. Your near vision would be useless. You could not read, could not thread a needle, could not see the food on your own fork clearly. The muscle is not the villain of this story. The muscle is a magnificent thing. Its power to reshape a living lens on demand is one of the finest bits of engineering in your whole body. A young eye can swing through some 14 diopters of focusing range from the far horizon down to a few inches from the nose, and it can do it in a fraction of a second, over and over, thousands of times a day, without your ever once being aware of it. You do not want to abolish that. You want to stop asking it to hold one single note for 7 straight hours. A muscle that can sprint is not damaged by sprinting. It is worn down by being told to clench and never let go. And that word, hold, is really the whole heart of the matter, so let me sit with it. Every muscle in you has a rest position and a working position. Your hand, when you make a fist and hold it, will ache and tremble and finally cramp, not because fists are bad, but because a muscle held in one contraction, without rhythm, without release, begins to protest. It feels with the byproducts of its own effort. It stiffens. The ciliary muscle is smooth muscle, a different kind than the muscle in your fist, slower and steadier and tireless in a way your hand is not, but it is still a muscle, and it still has a working position and a resting position. When you read or scroll or type at arm's length, you are asking it to hold the working position. Not a huge contraction, not a maximal one, but a sustained low clench hour after hour with no signal ever telling it to let go. Optical infinity is the signal that tells it to let go. That is all a distant glance really is. It is the message the muscle has been waiting for, delivered on a beam of nearly parallel light. There is a beautiful subtlety hiding in the aging eye that I cannot resist adding, because it deepens everything we have said. For a long time, people assumed that when reading vision fails in middle age, when a person in their late 40s starts holding the newspaper farther and farther away until their arms run out, the cause must be that the ciliary muscle has grown weak and tired. A worn-out muscle, they thought. It seems the obvious guess. But it turns out to be wrong, and the way we learned it was wrong is instructive. The muscle we now understand largely keeps its strength well into old age. It can still contract. It is still trying. What has changed is the lens itself. Over the decades, the proteins inside the crystalline lens slowly cross-link and pack together, and the lens grows stiff, like a soft ball of clay left out until it hardens. And a stiff lens will not spring into that fat, round, near-focus shape no matter how hard the muscle pulls on it. The muscle contracts, the tension releases just as it always did, but the lens no longer answers. It has lost its youth, its willingness to bend. By a person's late 50s or early 60s, the amplitude of accommodation has fallen below a single diopter, where a child of 10 commanded 14. We call this presbyopia, the old eye, and the poignant thing is that the muscle is not the one who quit. The muscle is still at its post, still pulling, still faithful. It is the lens underneath that has quietly stopped listening. I bring this in because it clarifies who does what. The muscle is the actor. The lens is the instrument. The strain we have been talking about all evening, the screen strain, the locked-up distance blur, is a story about the actor being made to hold a pose too long. The aging blur is a different story entirely, a story about the instrument going stiff in the actor's hands. They feel alike from the inside. Both make the world go soft. But they come from opposite ends of the machine, and only one of them is yours to influence by where you point your eyes. You cannot unstiffen a 60-year-old lens by looking at the horizon, but you can, at any age, give that tireless little muscle the one thing it keeps asking for, which is permission to stop pulling. And now that we understand precisely what we are giving it, and precisely why a drop of nightshade and a distant hillside amount to the same medicine, we can finally ask the practical question honestly. How much of that medicine and how often does a 9-hour day in the glow actually require? Let us do the arithmetic gently, the way you would count sheep, because the numbers here are kind and they tell a clean story. Suppose you sit in the glow for a full working stretch, and every 20 minutes you lift your eyes and find something far away, and you hold it there for 20 seconds. 20 seconds out of every 20 minutes. 20 minutes is 1,200 seconds. So you are handing your tireless little muscle its rest for 20 parts out of 1,200. Work that fraction out, and it comes to about 1 6/10% of your looking time spent in the relaxed, far-away, zero-effort state. 1 6/10%. For the other 98 and some percent of the day, the muscle is pulling, holding, contracting, keeping that soft lens fat and bulging so the near thing stays sharp. Now hold that little number in your mind, 1 6/10%, and let me set beside it a different number that comes out of the work people have done on what actually relaxes an eye enough to matter. When researchers look at the kinds of visual rest that seem to push back against the eye stretching itself longer, against the slow creep toward nearsightedness, They do not find that a flick of the eyes for a handful of seconds does much of anything measurable. What seems to register, what seems to leave a fingerprint on the biology, is something closer to 5 continuous minutes at true distance for every hour of near work. 5 minutes in every 60. Do that division and you land near 8 and 3/10% of your time given over to the relaxed state. So look at the two fractions lying next to each other. 1 and 6/10% from the little rule everyone recites, 8 and 3/10% from the research on what genuinely seems to help. The second is about 5 times the first. 5 times the dose. And this, I think, is the honest shape of the whole matter, and it is not a scandal and it is not a betrayal. It is simply a case of a good idea prescribed at a gentle, hopeful dose that turns out to be too small to move the needle very far. The direction is right. The medicine is real. There is just not enough of it in the bottle. I want to be careful and fair here, because it would be easy to swing too hard the other way and start sneering at a rule that has helped calm a great many tired eyes. The underlying optics, remember, are not in question at all. When you send your gaze out past 6 meters, past 20 feet, the light arriving at your eye is spread so nearly flat that the focusing demand falls to about 1/6 of a diopter. And 1/6 of a diopter is below the smallest step any spectacle lens is even ground to correct. It is, for all the eye can tell, infinity. And at infinity, that ciliary muscle genuinely does let go. That part is bedrock. The physics of where to look is exactly right. It is only the how long and the how often that were, shall we say, chosen by a friendly guess rather than measured out on a bench. And when you think about the true size of the exposure, the mismatch gets easier to feel in your bones. Consider a young person today living something close to 9 hours a day inside that glow. 9 hours. That is not a spell of reading before bed. That is most of the waking, focusing life of the eye poured into the near distance, into the fat lens muscle-pulling posture, hour upon hour upon hour. Against a river running that wide and that steady, a 20-second glance every so often is a teaspoon dipped out and thrown over the shoulder. The teaspoon is not wrong. It is simply of a different order than the flood it is meant to answer. So if we are going to build the real thing, the honest prescription, from the diopters and the nerves upward, we should build it to match the size of the problem, and we should build it to fix more than one broken part at once. Because remember, the strain we have been circling all evening is not a single ailment. It is at least 2 troubles wearing the same coat. There is the muscle that will not let go, the locked accommodation, the near lens pose held so long the eye forgets how to flatten. And there is the tear film drying and thinning across the front of the eye because the blinking has quietly collapsed. Let us not forget that second trouble, because the far gaze alone does not entirely cure it. Think back to what the blinking does under a screen. At rest, a person blinks something like 22 times a minute, wetting and sweeping and renewing that thin film of tears with every soft closing of the lids. Put a book on the table in front of them, and the rate falls to around 10. Put glowing text on a screen in front of them, and it drops to about 7. 7 blinks a minute where there were 22. That is roughly a 2/3 collapse in the very act that keeps the front of the eye from drying out. And worse than the mere counting, the blinks that do happen stop finishing. Where perhaps 4 out of 5 blinks were already a touch incomplete at baseline, under the pull of a screen better than 9 out of 10 fail to fully close, fail to draw the lid all the way down and sweep fresh tears across the lower third of the cornea. That lower strip stays uncovered, and it dries, and the tear film there begins to break apart faster and faster as the day wears on. You can watch it happen in the measurements. The time it takes for the tear film to first crack open after a blink falls from around 9 seconds in the freshness of the morning to under 7 by the tired end of the afternoon. The eye is drying out in slow motion across the working day, and the person feels it only as a vague grittiness, a burning, a wish to close their eyes. So the corrected answer has to reach both of these at once, the stuck muscle and the parched surface, and here is the quiet elegance of it. The very act of looking far away tends to pull your blinking back toward normal as a matter of course, because you are no longer locked in the fixed, hungry stare that the near screen demands. When the eyes relax outward, the lids tend to resume their easy rhythm. So a proper far gaze rest is doing double duty. It is giving the ciliary muscle its longed-for permission to release, letting the lens flatten and the focusing power drop back toward that near-zero baseline. And it is at the same time letting the lids fall back into their sweeping wetting cadence, drawing the tear film whole again across the cornea. One deliberate act aimed at two different injuries. If I were to write the prescription in the plainest words, then, forgetting the tidy chime of the old rule and listening instead to what the eye is actually asking for, it would sound something like this. Give the distance real time, not a token flick. Something on the order of 5 unhurried minutes in every hour spent out at true infinity, at the far wall, the window, the horizon, if you are lucky enough to have one. And in those minutes, blink. Blink fully, deliberately, letting the lids meet all the way, sweeping the film down over that neglected lower third of the cornea until the front of the eye is wet and whole again. You are not doing anything exotic. You are simply, for a few minutes in each hour, letting the eye return to the resting condition it was built around, the condition of an animal watching a far savanna rather than a scribe hunched over a page. And notice, this is not a burden bolted onto your day from outside. It is the eye's own factory setting. Everything we have traced tonight, the 59 diopters of focusing power built into that little globe, the fixed strong lens of the cornea, the soft adjustable lens behind it, the ring of muscle that fattens it for the near and releases it for the far, all of that machinery has a rest state, a home position, and the home position is the far look. The near work is the exertion. The distance is the relaxation. We have simply built ourselves a world in which the exertion runs 9 hours long and the relaxation has shrunk to a teaspoon, and then we wonder why the eyes ache. There is one more thread I have not yet fully pulled, and it is the strangest and most beautiful confirmation of everything we have said, because it comes not from looking at a far hillside at all, but from a bottle. We touched it earlier and set it aside, this idea that a drop of nightshade and a distant view are the same medicine. I want to come back to it now and open it all the way, because when you understand exactly how that drop works and why an old poison famous for widening the pupils of Renaissance ladies turns out to be the very same instruction, spoken in chemistry, that a mountain speaks in light, then the whole mechanism we have been assembling all evening finally clicks shut and locks into place. So let us follow the atropine into the eye and see precisely what it whispers to that muscle in the dark. Picture the muscle first, because you have to hold it in your mind clearly for any of this to mean anything. That little ring of smooth muscle sitting behind the colored part of your eye, wrapped around the lens like a drawstring around the mouth of a cloth bag. When it squeezes, the drawstring loosens, and the lens, which wants to be fat and round, gets to be fat and round, and you can read the small print. When it lets go, the drawstring tightens, the lens is pulled thin, and the far hillside comes into focus. That squeezing is not something you order. There is no lever in your head marked focus that your will can reach. The command travels down a quiet nerve, part of that great unhurried system that also slows your heart and stirs your gut. The part that works while you sleep, the parasympathetic branch. It uses a particular chemical messenger to speak to the muscle, a little molecule called acetylcholine, and the muscle has tiny docks along its surface built to catch exactly that molecule and no other. When the messenger lands in the dock, the muscle contracts. That is the whole conversation. A chemical is released, a chemical is caught, and the ring pulls tight. Now here is where the nightshade comes in, and I want you to appreciate the sheer sneakiness of it, because nature and chemistry together have played a trick so clean it looks like a magic act. Atropine is a molecule that comes from the deadly nightshade plant, the belladonna, which the old apothecaries knew was poison, and the Renaissance women used to widen their pupils because a wide dark pupil was thought beautiful, belladonna meaning beautiful lady. And what atropine does is absurdly simple in principle. It is shaped just enough like the real messenger that it fits into those same little docks on the muscle. It slides right in. But it is a counterfeit key. It feels the lock and it does not turn it. It sits in the dock and it does nothing, and worse, while it is squatting there, the real messenger cannot get in, because the seat is taken. So the muscle waits for its instruction to contract, and the instruction is being shouted, the acetylcholine is being released, But every dock is plugged with an impostor that gives no command. And a muscle that receives no command to contract does the only thing a muscle can do with no command. It relaxes. Completely. It goes slack. So watch what happens inside an eye that has taken a drop of that. The ciliary ring falls limp. The drawstring is pulled tight by the springy fibers around it. The lens is hauled flat, and the eye is now locked, chemically locked on the far distance. It cannot focus up close at all. Try to read a book, and the page swims, because the muscle that would fatten the lens for reading has been silenced. The pupil goes wide at the same time, for related reasons, which is why the old ladies used it, and it is why your eye doctor puts a cousin of it in your eye before peering into the back. But the part that matters for us tonight, the part that makes me want to stop and just sit with it, is that this is the very same state, the identical physical configuration of that little muscle, as the state you fall into when you lift your eyes from the page and look at a mountain. The mountain relaxes the muscle by removing the demand. The drop relaxes the muscle by removing the messenger. Two roads, one destination. The lens goes flat and the ring goes quiet either way. And that is why I called it the strangest confirmation of everything, because it is a controlled experiment that nature was kind enough to hand us. When someone comes into a clinic with that locked cramped muscle we spoke of earlier, the eye that has stared so long at the near that it will no longer let go of the near, the spasm that makes the world go soft and blurry in the distance for no reason the eye itself has changed, what does the doctor reach for? These very drops. Atropine or its gentler and quicker relatives, cyclopentalate, tropicamide, cousins that do the same counterfeit key trick, but let go faster so you are not blurred for a week. You put one in, the muscle is forced to release, the cramp is broken, and distance vision comes flooding back clear. If the cramp were caused by something else, by the eye truly growing longer, by some change in the shape of the whole globe, then blocking a muscle would do nothing at all. But it works. The blower lifts, and that tells you, as surely as any experiment can tell you anything, that the trouble was in the muscle all along, held in a contraction it could not release on its own, and that the cure, whether it comes in a bottle or comes as a view down a long hallway, is nothing more exotic than persuading that ring to let go. I find this beautiful in a way that is hard to say plainly, so let me just say it plainly and clumsily. We have a rule that a child could follow, look far away, and we have a poison that a physician measures out by the drop, and when you take them both apart down to the level of the molecule and the nerve, they turn out to be the same sentence written in two different alphabets. The distant view says to the muscle, in the language of light, there is nothing here for you to do, so rest. The drop says to the muscle, in the language of chemistry, you will receive no orders, so rest. And the muscle, which does not know or care which language it was spoken to in, rests. That is the whole confirmation. The mechanism we have been building all evening, diopter by diopter, nerve by nerve, is not a story I am telling you. It is a thing you can intervene on with a chemical and watch obey. Now let me guard against a wrong lesson, because there is one sitting right here waiting to be picked up by mistake. You might hear all this and think, well then, why bother with the mountain? Why not just carry the drops? And the answer is that the drop takes away too much. It does not just relax the muscle for a rest, it abolishes the muscle for hours. And while it is working, you cannot focus near at all, you cannot read. The pupil hangs open and lets in a flood of light that dazzles you. The drop is a sledgehammer, useful when a muscle is truly cramped and must be forced open, foolish as a daily habit. The distant view is the gentle version, the free version, the one that relaxes the muscle for as long as you look and then hands control right back the instant you drop your eyes to the page. Same destination, but one you can walk to and from 100 times a day at no cost, and one you take only when the ring is jammed and needs breaking loose. The physics is identical. The wisdom is in the dosage, and dosage, you will remember, has been the quiet villain of this entire evening. While we have the muscle laid open like this, let me clear away one more thing that people get exactly backwards, because it bears on the muscle and its long life. There comes a time, somewhere past the middle of a life, when the near print starts drifting away from you, when you find yourself holding the newspaper at arm's length and then wishing your arm were longer. Everyone knows this happens, and almost everyone assumes it happens because the muscle has grown old and tired, worn out from a lifetime of squeezing, gone weak the way an old man's grip goes weak. It is the natural guess. It is wrong. The muscle is not the thing that fails. The newer evidence, when people went looking carefully, found that little ring keeps a great deal of its strength clear into old age. It can still pull. What has failed is the lens itself. Over the decades, the proteins inside that clear little lens slowly cross-link and pack together and stiffen the way a soft new candle stiffens into a hard old one, until the lens simply will not spring into its fat round shape anymore no matter how hard the muscle squeezes. The muscle pulls the drawstring loose and the lens, hardened, refuses to bulge. So the young ring is heaving away at a lens that has turned to glass. You can watch the number fall if you like numbers. A child of 10 has an enormous range, can throw about 14 diopters of focusing power into the near, can bring a thing to within a few inches of the nose and hold it sharp. A healthy person of 20 still commands something like 10 diopters, a near point out around 4 inches. By the age of 50, that range has collapsed to about half of 1 diopter, the near point drifting out to around 2 meters, 6 feet or so, which is why the newspaper goes to arm's length and then past it. And by the late 50s and into the 60s, it drops under a single diopter and keeps sinking. A man named Arthur Dewan sat down and measured all this carefully and laid it out in tables back in 1922, and the curve he drew still holds. But notice what the curve is really measuring. It is measuring the lens turning to stone, not the muscle giving up. The muscle in the dark is loyal to the very end. It goes on pulling at a drawstring tied to a lens that will no longer answer, and it is the lens, the beautiful clear jelly that has been bending your light since before you were born, that quietly hardens and closes the near world off. So hold these two facts side by side, because together they finish the portrait of that muscle we have been circling all night. When it is young and the lens is soft, the muscle's only enemy is being asked to hold its squeeze too long without rest. The cramp, the spasm, the lock that a distant view or a drop of nightshade will release. And when it is old, the muscle still willing, still strong, betrayed only by the stiffening glass in front of it. In neither case is the muscle the weakling we imagine. It is the most faithful and least thanked worker in the whole body, laboring in a darkness you will never see into, obeying a nerve you cannot feel, and asking in return only that now and then you give it a horizon to rest on. Now let me take you back to that word I dropped a little while ago, the one that sounds like something out of an old poison cabinet. Atropine. It comes from the deadly nightshade, a plant with berries dark as ink, and for a very long time people knew it did a strange thing to the eye. Put a drop of it in, and the pupil blows wide open, black and enormous, and the person can no longer read the words in their own hand. Ladies in certain centuries used it to make their eyes look large and dreamy, which is a foolish thing to do to yourself, but there it is. What matters to us is not the fashion. What matters is what the drop is actually doing down inside, because it turns out to be the cleanest confession the eye ever makes about how it works. Here is the trick of it. That ciliary muscle, the ring I have been talking about all night, the one you have never felt, takes its orders from a particular kind of nerve. We call that branch the parasympathetic, and you do not have to remember the name, only the flavor of it. It is the quiet branch, the resting branch, the one that runs your digestion and slows your heart and tells the ciliary ring to squeeze so the lens can fatten up for close work. The signal travels along the nerve and lands on little receiving docks on the muscle, and the muscle reads the message and contracts. Atropine walks in and sits down in those docks. It plugs them. It does not do anything itself. It just occupies the chair so the real messenger cannot sit. And with the message blocked, the muscle has no choice. It lets go. It goes slack. It relaxes all the way, whether the eye wants to or not. Think about what that means for a person whose muscle is locked in that cramp, that spasm, that pseudomyopia we built up earlier, where the ring has clenched down after too many hours of near work and simply will not release, so the whole distant world has gone soft and blurred. The doctor puts in a drop, and the chemical pries the muscle's fingers open from the inside. The lens flattens. The distance snaps clear. Now hold that picture right up against the other thing, the thing this entire lecture is supposedly about. When you lift your eyes off the page and let them fall on a far horizon, a rooftop, a line of hills, a bird crossing the far end of the room, you are relaxing that very same muscle. Not with a poison, with geometry. The far light arrives with almost no bend left in it, that gentle 1/6 of a diopter we measured, so close to nothing that the muscle has nothing to hold and quietly lets go on its own. So there are two roads to the same rest. One is a drop of nightshade blocking the nerve by force. The other is a distant view removing the muscle's job so gently that it releases by itself. And the fact that both roads end in the exact same place, a slack ciliary ring and a flattened lens, that is the proof. That is nature signing its name at the bottom of the page. It tells you the mechanism is real, that the whole story is about one small muscle under the command of one quiet nerve, and that looking far away is doing, for free and without any berries, the very thing the drug does with such theatrical force. I love this, because it is how you check any idea in physics. You do not just tell a pretty story about lenses and muscles and hope it sounds right. You go and find a completely different way in, a side door nobody was watching, and you see whether it lands you in the same room. The drop and the distance are two completely different side doors. The berry knows nothing about optical infinity. The horizon knows nothing about parasympathetic receptors. And yet they meet. When two strangers who have never spoken tell you the identical story, you can start to believe them. Now I have to be honest with you about the old eye again, because this atropine business clears up a confusion that has fooled clever people for generations. For the longest time, when someone hit their 50s and could no longer read the newspaper without holding it out at arm's length, everyone assumed the muscle had simply worn out, grown tired, grown weak, like an old rope frayed past its strength. It seemed obvious. The near world closes, therefore the near focusing engine must have failed. But the newer evidence points somewhere else entirely, and it is one of those quiet reversals that makes you sit up in the dark. The muscle, it turns out, is still strong, still willing. Well into old age, that ring can still squeeze with most of its old force. The thing that failed is not the muscle at all. It is the lens. Remember what that lens is. A soft, clear, living jelly, layered like an onion, that spends every single day of your life adding new layers on the outside while never throwing the old ones away. Nothing ever leaves. So decade by decade, the center of it grows crowded, the proteins packed tighter and tighter, cross-linking, stiffening, compacting into something closer to a hard candy than a droplet, and a hard lens will not spring. The young muscle can pull all it likes, release all the tension it likes on those thread-like zonules, but the stiffened lens no longer leaps into a fat, round shape the way it did when you were 10 and could focus on something almost touching your nose. That is presbyopia. Not a dying muscle, a hardening glass. By the late 50s and into the 60s, the whole range of focus, that power we call the amplitude, has fallen below a single diopter. A 10-year-old commands something like 14 of them, a 20-year-old around 10, and the 50-year-old is left with about half of one, a near point drifting out to something like 2 meters, which is why the menu goes to arm's length and then eventually past the length of the arm, and that is when the little reading glasses appear. Do you see how the atropine ties it together, though? The drug relaxes the muscle. It proves the muscle takes orders and can obey them, and the old eye proves the muscle keeps that obedience long after the lens is quit. So the muscle is exonerated on both counts. When you are young, it is the tireless worker that only ever suffers from being asked to hold its grip too long. When you are old, it is the loyal servant still reporting for duty in front of a window that is fogged and frozen and will no longer open. In neither case did the muscle let you down. I find something almost tender in that. We spend our lives never feeling this thing, never thanking it, and it never once stops working, and even when the near world closes on us, the fault lies elsewhere. All right, we have the mechanism nailed down now from 3 directions. The optics tell us why far light needs no bending. The physiology tells us how the muscle lets go. And the pharmacology, the drop of nightshade, confirms that the whole system runs on that one quiet nerve and that relaxation is its natural resting state. So let us circle back, with all of that in hand, to the rule we started with, the tidy little chant of 20 and 20 and 20, And let us ask the harder question. Not is it wrong? We have already seen it is not wrong, exactly. The distance is real physics. The direction of the advice is sound. Looking far away genuinely does release the muscle. The question is whether the dose is enough, whether 20 seconds every 20 minutes actually delivers what the eye needs, or whether it is a spoonful of medicine held up against the thirst that wants a glass. And here is where the arithmetic gets uncomfortable, so let us do it slowly, the way you would do it lying awake and turning a number over. 20 seconds of rest inside every 20 minutes of work. 20 minutes is 1,200 seconds. So 20 seconds out of 1,200 is 1 part in 60. Work that out and it comes to a hair over 1.5% of your time given back to the distant horizon. 1.5%. For the other 98.5%, that muscle is still clenched down over its near task, still holding the lens fat and round, still doing the one thing we said it must not be asked to do for too long without a proper rest. Now set beside that the number the actual research on relaxing the eye keeps pointing toward. The work on visual signals that seem to hold the eye's growth in check suggests something much larger. Not 20 seconds. More like 5 full continuous minutes of far gaze inside every hour. 5 minutes in 60 is 8.3% of your time. Compare the two, 1.5% from the famous rule, 8.3% from the research, that is more than 5 times as much rest. 5 times. It is the difference between the muscle getting a genuine stretch and getting a wink so brief it has barely let go before it must clench again. And I want to sit with that gap for a while, because it is where the whole comfortable story starts to come apart in our hands, and what comes after it is far more interesting than the rule we were handed. Let me tell you what that gap really means. Because on paper it is just 2 little percentages sitting next to each other, and percentages have a way of hiding how much life is packed inside them. Imagine you are asked to hold your arm straight out in front of you holding a book, and you must hold it there. And every 20 minutes someone lets you drop it for 20 seconds, and then you must lift it again. Would you call that rest? Your arm would be screaming. 20 seconds is not recovery. It is a taunt. The muscle barely uncurls before it is dragged back to work, and the ciliary muscle, that little silent ring around the lens, is being asked for something not so different. Hour after hour it holds the lens in its fat, bulging, near-focus shape, and we hand it a wink of relief so short that the tension has scarcely drained out of it before the next page, the next line, the next glowing rectangle pulls it tight again. So here we are with a rule that got one thing gloriously right and 2 things rather wrong. It knew, somehow, without saying so, that far away is where the eye rests. That part is carved into the optics themselves. 20 feet is optical infinity, and at optical infinity the demand on the muscle falls to something like 1/6 of a diopter, which is to say almost nothing at all, a whisper, a rounding error. That much is true and will always be true, but the 2/20s that come after, the 20 seconds and the 20 minutes, those were never weighed on any scientific scale. They were chosen because they were easy to remember, because a rule made of 3 of the same number slides into the mind and stays there. And a rule you remember is worth more than a perfect rule you forget. I will give it that. But we should not confuse a good mnemonic with a measured truth. And now I want to bring in a witness, not a person, a chemical. Because when you want to know whether you truly understand how a machine works, one of the best tests is this. Can you reach in with something completely different, from a completely different direction, and produce the very same effect on purpose? If you can, then your picture of the machine is probably right. If you cannot, then somewhere your story has a hole. Here is the chemical. It is called atropine. It comes originally from a rather nasty plant, the sort of plant that has been feared and respected for a very long time. And atropine does something specific inside the eye. Remember how the ciliary muscle contracts. It does not contract because you will it to. It contracts because a nerve, running on what we call the parasympathetic pathway, sends it a signal, and that signal arrives as a little puff of a messenger molecule that lands on tiny receiving docks on the muscle. When the messenger lands, the muscle squeezes. That is how the lens is fattened for near work. Now atropine walks in and sits down on those very docks, and it does nothing while it sits there except take up the space. The messenger arrives and finds no room. The signal cannot be heard. And so the muscle, receiving no order to contract, does the only thing a muscle does when it hears nothing at all. It relaxes. Fully. Helplessly. The lens goes flat. The eye is locked at distance and cannot focus up close for hours. Sit with what that tells us. We have a natural way to relax that muscle. You look at something 20 feet away or farther, the demand for focus drops to nearly zero, and the muscle, having nothing to do, lets go. And we have a chemical way to relax that same muscle. You block the nerve's message with atropine, and the muscle, hearing nothing, lets go. Two roads from utterly different worlds, one made of light and geometry, the other made of molecules and nerve signals, and they arrive at the exact same place. The lens goes flat. The muscle rests. When two roads that share nothing agree so completely on where they end, you can be quite confident the map is real. The mechanism is not a guess. It is not a story we told to feel good. It is a genuine handle on the machine, and we can pull that handle two different ways and watch the same thing happen every time. This is why the doctors reach for these very drops when the muscle gets stuck, because it does get stuck. We spoke of that locked muscle, that false nearsightedness, where after a long day of close work the ciliary ring simply will not release, and distance goes soft and blurry as if you had suddenly grown nearsighted overnight, though nothing about the length or the true shape of your eye has changed one bit. When that spasm will not break on its own, one treatment is to put in a cycloplegic drop, atropine or one of its gentler cousins, and force the release chemically. It is, if you think about it, a rather beautiful thing. The drop is doing with a molecule exactly what a long walk with a distant horizon would do with light. It is buying the muscle its rest by breaking the signal that keeps it clenched. And it works, which is the whole point. It works because the picture is correct. Now, while we have this muscle under the microscope of our attention, let me clear away an old misunderstanding, because it is a good one and it teaches something. You would think, would you not, that as people get older and their eyes lose their ability to focus up close, the trouble must be the muscle wearing out, the muscle getting tired, weak, feeble with age, like an old spring that has lost its snap. It is the natural guess. And it is wrong. That is the surprise. When you look carefully at old eyes, the ciliary muscle itself keeps most of its strength well into old age. It can still squeeze. The muscle is not the villain. The villain is the lens. Over the decades, the proteins inside that clear little lens slowly cross-link and pack together, and the whole thing stiffens, like caramel cooling in a pan, going from soft and springy to hard and set. And a stiff lens will not spring into its fat near-focus shape, no matter how hard the muscle pulls on it. The muscle contracts, faithfully, as it always did, and the lens simply refuses to bulge. So the loss of near focus with age, the reason a person in their 50s holds the newspaper at arm's length, and finally, grumbling, gets reading glasses, is not a failure of will or muscle. It is a hardening of glass, and the numbers on this are quietly staggering when you lay them out along a life. A child of 10 has an enormous range of focus, something like 14 diopters of accommodation, which means that child can pull a thing right up close, 10 centimeters from the nose, and hold it sharp with ease. A young adult of 20 still has around 10 diopters, near point about 10 centimeters, still marvelous. And then it drains away, slowly and without your noticing, year by year, until by the age of 50 it has fallen to something like half a diopter, and the nearest thing you can hold in focus has retreated to about 2 meters away, well past the page in your hands. A man named Duane sat down and measured this decline carefully, patient case after patient case, and laid it out in tables back in the early 1920s, so we have known the shape of this fading for over a century. It is not a disease. It happens to everyone who lives long enough. The lens simply hardens on schedule, and there is a strange gentleness in that the eye keeps its muscle to the end and loses only its glass. But notice, and this is the thread I do not want you to lose in all this talk of aging lenses, Notice that none of this touches the young eye at the screen. The child, the student, the worker in their 20s and 30s, they have all the accommodation in the world. Their lenses are soft and eager, their muscles are strong and quick, and yet they are the ones filling those surveys with blurred vision and dry, red, aching eyes. Their trouble is not that the eye cannot focus close. Their trouble is precisely that it can, and it does, and it will not stop. All that beautiful focusing power, all those diopters the child would envy, are being spent holding the lens fat for hour upon hour upon hour on a thing held close and lit from within, while the muscle that does the holding never gets a rest long enough to matter. So we have gathered our evidence, and it points somewhere the famous rule did not quite reach. We know the muscle rests at distance. We know it rests because light and geometry stop demanding anything of it there. We know it can be forced to rest by a drug, and that the two agree, which means we understand it. We know the muscle does not age out of the job, that the young eye at the screen has power to spare, and that the trouble is not weakness but relentlessness. And we know, from the arithmetic that started to come apart in our hands a little while ago, that 20 seconds is a wink, where the eye wanted 5 whole minutes. All of this is standing there, assembled, waiting. And the question that now rises up out of all of it is not whether the rule is wrong, because a rule that gets the distance right and the dosage thin is not so much wrong as unfinished. The question is what the finished thing would look like if we built it honestly from the diopters and the nerves upward, and asked not what is easy to remember, but what the muscle in the dark actually needs. So let us build it. Let us set aside the little rhyme for a moment, the one that trips so easily off the tongue, and instead ask the muscle itself what it would want if it could speak. It cannot speak, of course. It has no nerve that reports back to your awareness. But it can tell us plainly through its behavior, and its behavior has already told us 3 things we can trust. The first thing it told us is about distance, and that part the old rule got exactly right. Somewhere past 6 meters, past 20 feet, the light coming into your eye has spread so nearly flat that the demand on the lens falls to about 1/6 of a diopter, and 1/6 of a diopter is nothing. It is below the smallest step any spectacle maker bothers to grind, so there is no reason to change the distance in our finished rule. 20 feet is a fine choice. A far wall, a window with a tree in it, a rooftop across the way, a cloud, anything that sits at that gentle far edge will do, because to the physics it is all simply infinity, and infinity asks nothing. The second thing the muscle told us is about time. And here is where the old rule went thin. 20 seconds is a courtesy, not a treatment. It is long enough to notice the far wall and blink twice and feel, briefly, that you have done something kind for yourself. But the work that matters, the release of a muscle that has been clenched for the better part of an hour, is not a thing that finishes in a wink. The studies that looked at genuinely relaxing that muscle, the ones concerned with the deeper worry of the eye slowly growing too long over years, pointed towards something closer to 5 continuous minutes in every hour spent far away. 5 minutes, not 20 seconds. And when you set those two side by side, you feel the gap in your stomach. 5 minutes out of 60 is a little more than 8% of your hour handed back to the relaxed state. 20 seconds out of 20 minutes is 1.5%. So the rule as it stands is giving the muscle about 1/5 of what the evidence suggests it actually needs. It is not the wrong medicine. It is the right medicine at 1/5 of the dose, and we would not accept that from a pharmacist, so we should not accept it from a rhyme. I want you to sit with how ordinary that failure is, because it is not the failure of a foolish idea. It is the failure of a memorable idea. The number 20 repeated 3 times is easy to keep in your head while you are busy, and easy to say to a room full of tired office workers, and that ease is worth something real. A treatment nobody remembers to take is worth nothing at all. So I have some sympathy for the man who built it. He was not lying to anyone. He was making a thing sticky enough to survive in a distracted mind. But we are not in a distracted mind right now. We are lying in the quiet, thinking slowly, and slow, careful thought is allowed to ask for the honest dose, even when the honest dose is harder to remember. Now the third thing the muscle told us, or rather the eye told us, was not about the lens at all. It was about the tears. Remember the blink. At ease, you blink something like 22 times a minute. A soft, steady weather that keeps the front of the eye polished and wet. Put a book in front of you and the weather slows to about 10. Put a glowing screen in front of you and it slows again, down to about 7 times a minute, which is roughly a third of what you began with. And it is worse than the count, because when you do blink at a screen, more of those blinks are lazy, unfinished things. At ease already, most blinks are a little incomplete, but staring at a bright screen pushes the incomplete ones up above 9 in 10, and an incomplete blink leaves the lower third of the eye untouched, unwiped, drying in the open air. You can watch the consequence run downhill across a working day. The film of tears that should sit stable on the eye for around 9 seconds in the morning breaks apart in under 7 by the evening. The eye is quietly going out of tune hour by hour, and none of it reaches your attention until it arrives as grit and ache and that sandy feeling behind the lids at the end of the afternoon. So a finish rule has to do 2 jobs, not 1, and the old rhyme only ever gestured at the first. It has to unclench the muscle, and it has to re-wet the eye. The far gaze handles the muscle given enough minutes, but the far gaze does not, by itself, make you blink. You can stare at a distant tree just as dryly and just as rarely as you stared at the screen. So into our honest version we have to fold a deliberate thing, a few slow full blinks, the kind that close all the way and press the lids together for a soft moment before opening. Not the flutter. The full, patient closing. That is the motion that draws a fresh sheet of tears from the little glands at the lid margins and spreads it clean across the whole eye, down into that lower third the hurried blinks keep missing. Put it together, and the shape of the thing changes. Instead of a wink at a wall every 20 minutes, you want a genuine pause, something near 5 minutes, once in each hour of near work, spent looking at real distance, and during that pause you want to blink the way you blinked before screens taught you to forget. The distance stays 20 feet, because the physics of that number is sound and always was. What changes is that you stop measuring the cure in seconds and start measuring it in minutes, and you stop pretending the eye is only a lens when it is also a wet, living surface that needs tending. And I know what the practical part of your mind is murmuring as you drift here. 5 minutes an hour all day is a great deal of looking away. For someone spending 7 hours a day at a screen, and there are many, and for the young especially, some of them near 9 hours, that is the better part of an hour of far gazing spread across the day. It sounds like a lot. But notice what has really happened. We have not invented a burden. We have measured a debt that was already being run up. The eye was always paying for those hours. It simply paid in the hidden currency of a locked muscle and a drying film and sent no bill until evening. All the honest rule does is move the payment into daylight, into small regular installments you can feel, instead of one aching lump sum you cannot escape. There is a deeper reason to take the far gaze seriously, deeper than the ache of a single evening, and it circles back to the muscle in the dark. When that muscle stays contracted long enough, hour after hour, day after day, year after year, in a young eye that is still growing, something begins to shift that is no longer just a spasm you can shake off with a good look at the horizon. The eye can begin to grow very slightly too long from front to back, and once it grows that way, it does not spring back. That is true myopia, the kind that lives in the length of the eyeball and not merely in the tension of a muscle, and it is spreading through the world in a way that ought to make us pay attention. The projection is that by the middle of this century, something near half of all the people alive will be nearsighted, a staggering climb from where we stood at the turn of the millennium. And the near work that fills a modern childhood is tangled up in that climb, not as the only cause, but as a real thread in it. I do not want to frighten anyone towards sleep, so let me hand you the other half of that finding, the hopeful half, because it too points at the far gaze. When they looked at what actually protects children's eyes, the strongest single thing was not clever glasses or drops or exercises. It was time spent outdoors. A program that simply pushed young children out into the daylight for a couple of hours a day pushed the rate of nearsightedness down, and down substantially in only a few years. Part of that is surely the distance itself, eyes resting on far things instead of near ones. And part of it seems to be the light the sheer brightness of the open sky doing something to the growing eye that a lit room can never match. So the far wall indoors is good. The far horizon outdoors under real sky is better still, and it is the same medicine at full strength. Which brings us gently back to where all of this began, to that ring of muscle you have never once felt in your life. It has been working since the moment you opened your eyes this morning, adjusting and readjusting the lens thousands of times without ever asking your permission or reporting its fatigue. You cannot flex it the way you flex a hand. You cannot rest it the way you consciously drop your shoulders. It answers only to a distance and to a nerve you do not command. And that, when you really let it settle, is the strange and rather beautiful heart of this whole matter. The one thing you can do for it, the only lever you truly hold, is to give it something far away to look at, and the patience to look at it long enough to matter. Let me sit with that idea a little longer, because there is something in it worth turning over slowly, the way you turn a stone in your hand to catch the light on each face. You do not command this muscle. You coax it. And the way you coax it is not by trying, but by the opposite of trying. If I tell you to relax your jaw, you can do it. You feel the teeth unclench. If I tell you to relax your ciliary muscle, you have no idea what I am even asking. There is no handle. There is no dial with a little arrow you can nudge toward rest. The only way in is through the outside world. You give the eye a far thing, and the far thing does the relaxing for you. It is a curious sort of self-care, this. You help yourself by looking away from yourself, by putting your attention on the most distant object you can find and simply leaving it there. The muscle lets go because the light coming in no longer asks it to hold on. That is the whole trick. There is no willpower in it anywhere. And I want you to notice how gentle the demand really is out there at the far wall or the far horizon. We worked out that at 20 feet the divergence of the light is about 1/6 of a diopter, 16 or 17 hundredths, a whisper of a number. Below the smallest step any lens maker bothers to grind. Now imagine walking outside and lifting your eyes to a ridge line a mile off, or a cloud, or the moon. The light from those places arrives as nearly flat as light ever gets in this universe. The divergence is not 1/6 of a diopter. It is 100th, 1,000th, a number so close to zero that the eye simply files it under infinity and stops thinking about it. And in that filing, in that letting go, the lens flattens to its thinnest resting shape, the zonules take up their gentle pull, and the ciliary ring falls quiet. You have handed the eye the one instruction it most wants to receive, which is no instruction at all. Here is a thought that I find rather tender, if you will let me be tender for a moment in the dark. The eye of a child does this beautifully. A 10-year-old, we said, can summon 14 diopters of focusing power if the world asks it to. That child can bring a beetle to within a few inches of the nose and see every hair on its legs in perfect crispness, and then look up at a hawk turning against the clouds, and the whole apparatus swings from maximum effort to complete rest in a fraction of a second, tirelessly, all day long. That is a young lens, soft as warm wax, springing and flattening 1,000 times an hour and never once complaining. And the sad, slow truth we touched on earlier is that this softness does not last. The lens keeps laying down new fibers across a lifetime, layer upon layer, like the growth rings of a tree that never sheds anything, and the old fibers in the core get pressed and compacted, and the proteins inside them slowly cross-link and stiffen. By the 50s, the wax has become closer to a candle that has partly set. The power to spring drops below a single diopter, and for a long while we blamed the muscle for this. We said, the old ciliary muscle is worn out, it has lost its strength. But the newer look at it says something almost consoling. The muscle is not the one that failed. It still pulls and releases the way it always did, faithful to the end. It is the lens that hardened underneath its grip, the wax that would no longer bend. The engine kept running. The clay it was shaping simply went hard. I bring this up not to sadden you as you drift, but because it clarifies what we are really protecting when we look away. We are not building strength the way you build a bicep. There is no bicep here to build. You cannot exercise the ciliary muscle into some superior condition by making it work harder at screens all day. That is exactly backward. What sustained near work does is hold that faithful muscle in a state of contraction for hours on end, and when it stays clenched long enough it can seize, the way any muscle held tight too long can cramp. We gave that seizing a name. We called it accommodative spasm, or pseudomyopia, the false nearsightedness. The lens is stuck thick because the muscle will not let go, and now the far wall looks blurred and the person is frightened, thinking their eyes have suddenly worsened. But nothing has changed in the length of the eyeball. Nothing has grown or stretched. It is a cramp, plain and simple, a muscle that forgot how to open its hand. And how do the eye doctors break that cramp when it will not break on its own? This is the part I love, because it closes the loop so neatly you could tie a bow in it. They reach for a drop of atropine or one of its gentler cousins, cyclopentylate, tropicamide. These are old chemicals, the sort of thing extracted from nightshade plants that people knew about long before anyone understood a nerve. And what does the drop do? It walks up to the little parasympathetic switch that tells the ciliary muscle to contract, and it blocks that switch. It jams the doorbell. The message to clench cannot get through, and so the muscle, hearing nothing, does the only thing a muscle does when it hears nothing. It relaxes. It goes flat and quiet and open. The lens thins. The far world snaps clear again. Now sit with what that means, because it is the quiet proof under this entire evening. When you put a drop of atropine in an eye and the muscle falls open, and when you send that same eye to gaze at a distant mountain and the muscle falls open, you are watching the identical event by two different doors. The chemist reaches the muscle through the bloodstream and the receptor. The distant mountain reaches the muscle through the light and the retina and the nerve, but the destination is the same relaxed ring, the same thinned lens, the same zero-effort rest. The drop proves the mechanism is parasympathetic. The mountain proves you can trigger that mechanism for free with nothing but patience and a window. One costs a prescription and dilates your pupils so wide you squint at candles for a day. The other costs you the willingness to stop looking at the thing right in front of your nose. Same relaxation, wildly different price. That is not a coincidence. That is the physiology telling you, in the plainest language it has, that looking far away is chemistry you can perform on yourself with your eyelids open and your hands in your lap. So why, you might murmur into your pillow, do we not simply do it constantly? And here we brush up against the thing that turns this from a tidy piece of optics into a matter that presses on whole populations. Because the pull the other way is enormous now. We measured it. 7 hours and 2 minutes a day, on average, for a grown adult, staring into the near. 9 hours for the youngest among us. And the eye, especially the young growing eye, appears to take that steady diet of nearness as an instruction. Not a cramp this time. Something deeper and more permanent. The eyeball itself, in a child, seems to lengthen in response to years of close focus, to grow just slightly too long from front to back, so that the image no longer lands cleanly on the retina but falls short of it, and the far world blurs not because of any cramp, but because the vessel has changed shape. That is true myopia, and it does not relax away in the night, and the numbers on where this is heading are sobering enough that I will say them softly. By the middle of this coming century, the projection runs, roughly half of all the people on this earth may be nearsighted, close to 5 billion souls, up from something like 1 in 5 at the turn of the millennium. In some places where children study hardest and go outdoors least, 80 and 90% of young people finishing school already need glasses to see the far end of a room. But tucked inside that gloomy forecast is one of the loveliest clues in the whole business, and it points again at distance and at light. When a program in one place simply sent small children outdoors for 2 hours a day, the fraction of them becoming nearsighted fell, and fell substantially in the space of a couple of years. And the striking part is that it did not seem to be only about looking far, though they surely did look far out there. It seemed to be about the light itself, the sheer flood of brightness under an open sky, a brightness hundreds of times greater than any lamplit room, pouring onto the retina and, it appears, signaling the growing eye to hold its proper shape and not to elongate. So the far wall indoors relaxes the cramped muscle, yes, and that is real and worth doing. But the open sky does something grander for the young eye. It speaks to the very growth of the organ. The horizon relaxes the muscle. The daylight steadies the shape, and a child who gets both hours of it walks away with a kind of protection no 20-second glance at an office wall could ever confer, which returns us patiently to the arithmetic we cannot escape, the arithmetic that has been humming under this whole conversation like a low note under a melody. 20 seconds inside 20 minutes is 1 part in 60, a little more than 1.5% of your looking, against 7 or 9 hours of near, and the studies that tried to find protection in that thin slice kept coming back empty-handed, the scores of the rule followers and the rule ignorers lying almost on top of each other, 10.8 against 10.3, a difference you would not cross the street for. The principle was never wrong. Distance relaxes the muscle. That part is carved in the optics and confirmed by the atropine. It is only the dose that was too small, a single drop of medicine where the illness called for a cup. So let me take you into the pharmacy, because there is a bottle on the shelf there that settles the whole argument better than any lecture I could give. It is a very old medicine. People were dripping it into eyes long before anyone understood a nerve, long before anyone had drawn the ciliary muscle, back when it was squeezed from a nightshade plant and used of all things to make the pupils of fashionable women large and dark and dreamy. Atropine. And here is the quiet miracle of it. When you put a drop of atropine into an eye, two things happen. The pupil opens wide, yes, that is the famous part. But something less visible happens deeper in. The muscle we have been talking about all night, that little ring you have never felt, goes slack. Completely slack. It cannot contract. The chemical sits down on the very receptors the parasympathetic nerve would use to send its signal, and it holds the door shut so the message never arrives. The muscle relaxes because it has no choice. And now watch what that does to the person. Their near vision goes soft. They cannot read the small print on a bottle. They cannot thread a needle because the lens will not fatten up for close work. The muscle that fattens it is asleep. But their distance vision, the far wall, the tree across the road, the hills at the edge of town, that stays clear and easy and effortless. Which is exactly, precisely, atom for atom, the state your eye falls into when you lift your gaze and rest it on something 20 feet away. The atropine does with a molecule what the far wall does with light. Both of them arrive at the same address. A relaxed ring, a flattened lens, a distance held without labor. When two completely different roads deliver you to the identical door, you can be fairly sure you have found something real about the house. That is why I keep saying the principle was never the problem. The optics are honest, the chemistry confirms them. You could hardly ask for a cleaner demonstration that looking far away truly physically unclenches the thing that near work clenches. The doctors even use the drug on purpose for the poor souls whose muscle has locked itself into that cramp we spoke of. The false short-sightedness, the spasm. They cannot argue the muscle into letting go, so they drip in the medicine that peels its fingers off the lens one by one and give it a few days of enforced rest, and it forgets the bad habit. A chemical vacation for a muscle that would not take one on its own. Now hold that thought beside another one, because there is a beautiful confusion here worth clearing up while we are lying quiet in the dark. People assume that when your eyes get old, when the print starts sliding away from you in your 40s and 50s, and you begin holding the newspaper at arm's length like a trombone player, they assume the muscle's grown weak, that the little ring has worn out, gone feeble, lost its grip the way an old hand loses its strength. It is the natural guess, and it is wrong. That is one of the surprises this subject keeps in its back pocket. The muscle, it turns out, stays remarkably able. The newer looking suggests it can still contract, still pull, still do very nearly the job it always did well into old age. What fails is not the puller. It is the thing being pulled. The lens itself, that clear little bag of protein, slowly stiffens over the decades. The proteins inside it crowd together, link arms, compact, harden, until the lens is less like a soft grape you can squeeze into a plum and more like a boiled sweet. And a boiled sweet does not change shape no matter how lovingly you squeeze it. So the muscle contracts faithfully, obediently, and nothing happens. The command is sent. The messenger arrives. But the clay has turned to stone. You can watch the number fall almost like a tide going out. That young child we admired, with 14 diopters of focusing power in reserve, able to bring a thing to within a few finger widths of the nose and still see it sharp. The healthy young adult with 10. And then the slow ebb. By the middle years it is a trickle. By around the age of 50 it has dropped to something like half a diopter, which means the nearest thing you can hold in focus has drifted out to roughly 2 meters, out past the end of any comfortable reading distance, out where no book has ever been held. That is the whole story of reading glasses in a single falling number. Not a muscle giving up. A lens turning to amber. I tell you this partly because it is lovely, and partly because it matters for what we are actually trying to do about our screens. Because if you are young, the muscle and the lens are both willing, and the only thing standing between you and comfort is the clench, the sustained holding, the refusal to let the ring rest. And that is fixable. That is entirely, cheaply, freely fixable. The far wall fixes it. The window fixes it. The horizon fixes it. You do not need the pharmacy. You have the atropine of distance built into every window in the building. But, and here the melody comes back to that low note that has been humming under everything, you have to give it enough. That is the entire correction we are building toward tonight. Not a new principle. The old principle, dosed properly. The rule handed you a thimble and told you it was a meal. 20 seconds, once every 20 minutes, 1 part in 60 of your looking. And when the near work is 7 hours long, or 9 hours for the youngest among us who have never known a day without a glowing rectangle in it, that thimble simply cannot fill the well the day keeps emptying. Think of what the looking at distance is meant to do. It is meant to give the ring real rest, not a blink of rest, not a flinch of rest, but rest long enough that the tissue actually unwinds. The way a fist held tight for an hour does not truly open the instant you tell it to, but has to be coaxed, finger by finger, over long seconds, back into a flat and easy hand. The work on anti-short-sighted stimulus, the looking that actually seems to move the needle, keeps pointing at something like 5 continuous minutes at true distance for every hour of near. 5 minutes, not 20 seconds. And 5 minutes in every 60 is a little more than 8% of your looking, where the famous rule gave you 1.5%. 5 times the medicine. Roughly 5 times. Suddenly the arithmetic is not embarrassing anymore. Suddenly you are giving the muscle something it can use. And notice, please, this is not me tearing the rule down for sport. I have no quarrel with the man who invented it. He was standing in front of tired office workers trying to give them something simple enough to actually remember and do. And simple things that get done beat perfect things that get ignored. He said himself it was never meant as some unbreakable law of nature. It was a nudge, a mnemonic, 3 easy numbers that rhyme in the mind. And as a nudge it has its uses. But we are lying here in the honest dark where we can say the fuller thing out loud. The direction was right. The distance was right. Only the dose was a whisper where the body wanted a full sentence. There is one more piece the long stare at distance does not fix by itself, and it would be dishonest of me to let it slide past. The eye does not only clench at a screen, it also dries. Remember the blinking, that quiet collapse from 22 times a minute down to 7, and worse than the count, the blinks going lazy and unfinished. The lid coming down 4/5 of the way and lifting again without ever sweeping the full floor of the eye. 9 times out of 10, during the intense staring, the blink does not finish its job. And the lower third of that living window, the part the lazy blink never reaches, dries and stings and grows rough. You could relax the muscle perfectly and still walk away with eyes like sand, because relaxing the ring does nothing for the tear film. The morning's 15 good seconds of unbroken tears thinning down to 7 ragged ones by evening is a separate wound inflicted by the same enemy, the screen that holds your gaze so hard you forget to close your eyes. So the real answer, the one built up from diopters and nerves and tear films rather than from a rhyme, has 2 hands to it. The far gaze, long enough to matter, 5 slow minutes given back to the horizon every hour to unwind the ring. And the blink, restored, deliberate, complete, the lid brought all the way down and all the way up, spreading the film back across the whole living surface the way a wave smooths wet sand flat. One hand for the muscle, one hand for the water, and behind them both, if you are lucky enough to arrange it, the thing that helped that child more than any rule or drop, which is simply time spent outdoors, under the real and enormous sky, where the light is 100-fold what any lamp can give, and the far things are genuinely far. Think about what that means, that a child sent out into the ordinary daylight of an afternoon should have their eyes protected by something as unremarkable as the sky. There is no cleverness in it, no slide deck, no reminder chime, no rule with a name you can carry in your pocket. Just brightness, real brightness, the kind that pours down at a strength no lamp in any office has ever come close to matching, and distance, real distance, the far wall of the world set so far off that the light coming from it arrives as flat as light can be. Under that sky, the ring of muscle inside the eye has nothing to hold. It lets go of its own accord, the way your shoulders drop when you finally set down a heavy bag you had been carrying so long you stopped noticing the weight. And the eye, unspooling, does quietly for hours what no 20-second glance across a room could ever do in the same afternoon. Now I want to gather the whole thing into one place, because we have walked a long way and it would be a shame to arrive without seeing the shape of the road we took. We began with a rhyme, a tidy little rule, 4 numbers, easy to remember, handed around as though it were carved into something permanent. And I do not want you to think, after all this, that the rule is a lie or that the people who repeat it are fools. It is not a lie. It is a folk remedy that happens to point in exactly the right direction, the way an old sailor's saying about red skies at night points at real weather without knowing a single thing about pressure systems. The direction is true. Send your eyes to the far distance and the muscle relaxes. That part is as solid as any optics in any textbook. What the rhyme got wrong was never the idea. It was the dose. And dose is the word I keep coming back to, because dose is where good intentions go to quietly fail. You can have the right medicine and take too little of it and see no effect at all, and then conclude, wrongly, that the medicine does not work. That is very nearly what happened here. Somebody measured whether people who followed the rhyme had fewer sore eyes than people who ignored it, and the answer came back a flat nothing. 10.8 against 10.3, a difference so small it could have been the weather that day or which chair a person happened to sit in. And a careless reader would close that study and announce that looking into the distance does nothing for tired eyes, which is precisely backwards. The far gaze does everything. 20 seconds of it, once every 20 minutes, simply is not enough of the good thing to register above the noise of a long hard day. Let me put the arithmetic beside you one more time gently, because it is the crux of the whole matter and I want it to settle in before sleep takes you. 20 seconds inside 20 minutes. 20 minutes is 1,200 seconds. 20 out of 1,200 is 1 part in 60. Call it 1.5% of your looking. For every hour bent over the glowing rectangle, you have granted your ciliary muscles somewhere near 54 seconds of true rest, spread out in little slivers, most of them too brief for the muscle to have fully unwound before the next sliver ends and you turn back to the near work. Now set against that the number the myopia researchers keep arriving at when they ask how much far gazing actually moves the needle. At least 5 unbroken minutes in every hour. 5 minutes out of 60 is 1 part in 12. 8 1/3%. More than 5 times the ration the rhyme allows. And crucially, unbroken, 5 whole minutes in one continuous stretch, long enough for the muscle to sag all the way down into its resting slackness and stay there, rather than a scatter of glances that never let it arrive. There is a plumbing intuition here that I find useful. Imagine a stiff old valve, a wheel you have to turn to open a pipe, and it has seized a little from long use. If you flick the wheel for half a second and let go, it barely creeps and springs right back to where it was. Nothing changes. But if you take hold and hold it turned for a good long while, the thing eases, the stiffness works itself out, and it begins to move freely again. The muscle in your eye that has been clenched all day around near work is that stiff valve. 20 seconds is the flick. 5 minutes is the hold. Same wheel, same direction of turning, wildly different result, and the entire difference is how long you were willing to wait. So if the rhyme is a good idea underdosed, what does an honest prescription look like? Built from the physics rather than from a jingle that rhymes so pleasingly you never questioned it. It has two hands, as I said, and I want to name them once more so they are clear as you drift. The first hand is the long far gaze, not a flicked glance, a genuine surrender of the eyes to the true distance, 20 feet and beyond, held for minutes rather than seconds, ideally 5 continuous minutes given back somewhere inside every hour of close work. At that distance, the demand on your focusing power falls to about 1/6 of a diopter, a number so small it lives below the finest step your optician can even grind into a lens, which is why the eye treats it as no demand at all, as infinity, as rest. The muscle, at last, has nothing to do, and a muscle with nothing to do is a muscle unclenching. The second hand is the blink, and I do not want it to slip past you as an afterthought, because it addresses a wound the far gaze cannot touch. Remember what the screen did to your blinking. From something near 22 closings a minute when you are relaxed and looking about the room, down to 7 a minute in front of the moving text. And of those few that remain, a growing share are the lazy half blinks, the lid coming most of the way down and hurrying back up without ever fully meeting its partner, so that the lower third of the eye's front surface goes unwiped, undrenched, left to dry in the open air. That is why the film of tears that held together for a little over 9 seconds in the fresh of the morning has frayed to under 7 by the time the day is spent. Not because you cried it away, because you forgot, hour upon hour, to close your eyes properly, and no muscle relaxation on earth refills a tear film. Only a blink does that, a slow, deliberate, complete blink, lid all the way down to meet the lower lid, then all the way back up, sweeping a fresh sheet of moisture across the whole living window. Do a few of those on purpose when you remember. They cost nothing, and they undo something the distance gaze leaves entirely untouched. And standing behind both hands, if you can arrange it, is the sky. I keep returning to that child whose odds of going nearsighted were nearly halved not by any rule or drop or clever lens, but by 2 hours a day put outdoors under real light. There is a lesson buried in that which reaches further than sore eyes. It suggests that the deepest protection was never really about the near work at all, not entirely. It was about the light, about being bathed for a stretch of the day in the sheer flood of brightness the outdoors provides, a brightness that dwarfs any indoor lamp by a factor of 100 or more, and about having in that same outdoor world things that are honestly far away to rest your focus upon. The office and the schoolroom deprive the eye of both at once. They dim the light and they crowd the distance, and the body, which grew up over an unimaginable span of time under an open sky, notices the deprivation even when you do not. I find something almost tender in the fact that the fix costs nothing and asks for nothing you do not already own. No device, no purchase, no subscription to anything. Just a window or a door and the willingness to give your eyes back to the far things for longer than a rhyme told you to. The muscle wants to relax. That is its resting state, its default, the posture it falls into the moment you stop demanding near focus of it. All the effort in the system is the near effort, the clenching, the holding of the lens fat and round to bring the close thing into clarity. Distance is not something you do. Distance is what happens when you stop doing the near thing. And so the whole remedy, underneath all the numbers, is really an invitation to stop, regularly and for long enough, doing the one thing the screen never lets you stop doing. Which brings me, as the hour grows late and your own eyes may be softening towards sleep, back to the strangest character in this entire story, the muscle you have never felt. Think on it. Every other muscle in your body announces itself. Clench your fist and you feel the tension climb your forearm. Climb a stair and your legs report back, honestly, how much you asked of them. But the little ring of muscle that has been focusing your eyes since the moment you woke this morning has sent you no report at all. Not one signal. It contracted to read the label on a jar. It relaxed to watch a bird cross the yard. It tightened again for the pages of a book. 10,000 small adjustments across your waking day, and you felt precisely none of them. It works in a silence so complete that most people live an entire lifetime without ever once suspecting it is there. And I want you to sit with that silence for a while, because it tells you something about how nature builds a machine that is meant to run without you. A muscle you have to think about is a muscle that would get tired of your thinking. Nature took the job of focusing your eyes and hid it behind a wall where your attention cannot reach, and it wired that little ring not to the part of you that decides things, but to the quiet part, the housekeeping part, the same slow network of nerves that runs your heartbeat down when you are calm and starts your stomach working after a meal. The parasympathetic side, the side that is supposed to be for rest. And there is a small joke buried in that, a joke nature did not intend but which we can enjoy anyway. The nerve that relaxes the rest of you is the very same nerve that, at the eyepiece of a screen, holds that ring of muscle clenched for hour after hour. The system built for rest, put to work, and kept at work by a glowing rectangle held 1/3 of a meter from your face. Let me show you the shape of that clench once more. Gently, because it is the whole secret and it deserves to be turned over slowly in the dim light. When you look at something near, the ring squeezes inward. Squeezing inward, it lets the tension off the little threads that hold the lens, the zonules, and freed of that pull the soft lens inside you, swells up fat and round and strong, and it bends the light hard enough to bring the near thing into focus. That is work. That is the muscle doing something. And when you look far away, all the way out past 6 meters, where the light arrives so nearly straight that the eye can find no difference between that and light from a star, the ring lets go. It stops squeezing. The threads pull tight again, the lens is drawn thin and flat, and the whole apparatus falls into its one true resting posture. The posture it was shaped for across all those millions of years when far away meant the horizon and near meant only the rare and passing glance at a berry or a thorn or a child's face. The eye at rest is the eye looking at the distance. That is the baseline. That is zero. Everything else is effort. Now here is the part that I find quietly astonishing, and I hope you will too, lying there. For most of the history of our kind, that resting state was the default, and the effort was the exception. A hunter watching a plane, a fisherman reading the water, a person simply walking through the world, spent the great bulk of the day with that ring of muscle slack, gazing at things far enough away to ask nothing of it. The near work, the threading of a needle, the picking of a splinter, the close inspection of a wound, came in short bouts and then released. The eye spent its life mostly at rest and occasionally at labor. We have taken that arrangement and turned it exactly upside down. We now spend the great bulk of the waking day, 7 hours and 2 minutes for the average grown person, near 9 hours for the youngest among us, with that ring clenched, and we take our rests from the clenching in stolen seconds, if we take them at all. We have inverted the natural budget of the eye. The exception has become the rule, and the rule has become the exception, and the muscle, which cannot speak, simply does what it is told and stays tight. And when you keep a muscle tight for long enough, something happens that will be familiar to anyone who has ever held a heavy suitcase too far up a station platform. The hand does not want to open again. The fingers, having gripped, keep the shape of the grip even after you set the case down. You have to coax them flat. The ciliary ring can do the very same thing, and when it does, we have that curious name for it. The spasm of accommodation, the pseudo, the false nearsightedness. The muscle, having squeezed all day, forgets how to fully let go. You lift your eyes from the work to the far wall, and the wall is soft, blurred, swimming, as though you had grown nearsighted in an afternoon. But you have not. Nothing in the eye has changed its length. The eyeball is the same shape it was at breakfast. It is only that the little muscle is stuck part way, holding a bend in the lens you no longer need, and it will hold that bend until something persuades it to release. Rest will persuade it. Distance will persuade it. Sleep, blessedly, will persuade it, which is one small mercy in all of this, that the deepest release comes free every night to those who close their eyes. But we did not have to wait for nature to teach us that this is truly a matter of that one nerve and that one muscle. We proved it, in the most direct and slightly brutal way a curious person can prove anything, which is to reach in with a chemical and switch the thing off and watch what happens. There is a drug, atropine, drawn long ago from a rather dangerous plant, and it has a very specific talent. It walks up to the little docking places on the muscle where that quiet resting nerve delivers its message, and it sits down in them and it blocks them, so the message never arrives. The nerve calls out to squeeze and the muscle does not hear it. And what happens then? The ring goes slack, completely, helplessly slack. It cannot clench even if it wants to. The lens is drawn flat and held flat, and the person, for a day or so until the drug wears thin, simply cannot focus up close at all, because the machinery of focusing has been chemically unplugged. Sit with what that experiment tells us, because it is the keystone of the whole arch. When the doctors want to break a genuine lock spasm, a ring stuck tight from too much near work, they reach for that very drug or its gentler cousins, and they use it to force the release the eye can no longer manage on its own. They unplug the nerve, the muscle falls open, the spasm dissolves. And now look what we have. We have two roads to the exact same destination. One road is a drug that blocks the resting nerve and forces the muscle flat. The other road is simply to look, with no drug and no cost and no side effect, at something far enough away that the muscle has no reason to squeeze, and it falls flat on its own. The chemical and the horizon arrive at the identical resting lens. That is not a coincidence, and it is not a metaphor. It is the same muscle reaching the same slack state by two different keys. The drug is the loud proof. Distance is the quiet one. When you gaze at the far wall, you are doing to your eye, gently and for free, a milder version of what a physician does with a bottle of drops. You are unplugging the clench, and this is why I keep circling back, like a moth that cannot leave the one honest lamp in the room, to the difference between what is true here and what is merely prescribed. The physics is true. Far away relaxes the muscle, the drug confirms the pathway. The nerve is real, the ring is real, the flat resting lens is real, and the state of rest costs nothing and asks nothing and is available to you at the horizon 1,000 times a day. All of that is as solid as anything in this science. What is soft, what is only a guess wearing the costume of a fact, is the particular arithmetic of the little rule. 20 seconds. Once every 20 minutes. Those two numbers were never weighed and measured against the world. They were chosen because they were easy to say and easy to remember, and remembering is worth something. I will not pretend it is worth nothing. But the muscle does not care what is easy to remember. The muscle cares only how long it has been clenched and how long it is allowed to rest, and by that honest accounting the little rule gives it a rest so brief and so rare, hardly more than 1.5 parts in 100 of the working day, that it is a wonder we expected it to matter at all. So picture that ring again, there in the dark behind the colored part of your eye, where no light of thought has ever reached it. It has been squeezing since you woke. It squeezed for the mirror this morning and the cup in your hand and every near and glowing thing you lean toward all day long. It has sent you no word of complaint, because it has no voice to complain with, and it will keep squeezing for exactly as long as you keep giving it near things to squeeze for, and not 1 second longer. It is the most loyal and the most mute servant you own. And the whole of this long story, all the diopters and the tear films, and the studies that agreed and the studies that shrugged, comes down in the end to a single quiet act of mercy you can offer that silent muscle whenever you choose. You can give it the horizon, not for a stingy count of seconds snatched between tasks, but for long enough and often enough that the clench truly lets go and the lens falls flat and the eye remembers the shape it was born wearing. But let me be careful about the word mercy, because I do not want you to hear it as something soft or sentimental. It is a mechanical mercy. It is the mercy of releasing a spring you have been holding compressed for hours. Picture a clothespin. You know the little wooden pin with the metal spring in the middle, the kind that holds a shirt to a line in the yard. When you pinch it open, your fingers are doing work, and the spring is fighting you the whole time, wanting to snap back to its resting shape. Now imagine you had to hold that pin open all day, every waking hour for years. Your fingers would ache. They would learn the ache so well they would forget they were aching. That is your ciliary muscle when you look at a near thing, except the muscle does not tire the way your fingers do, and it does not speak the way your fingers do, and so the pinch just continues, quietly, and the only way to let the spring close is to give the eye something so far away that there is nothing left to pinch for. And here is a thing worth turning over slowly in the dark. The far thing does not have to be beautiful. It does not have to be a mountain or an ocean or a sunset. The physics does not care what you look at. It cares only about the distance, because the distance is what sets the bending of the light. At 20 feet, the light arriving from a point comes at you very nearly as a flat sheet, and a flat sheet asks the lens for almost nothing. And almost nothing is what lets the muscle go slack. A blank wall across a large room will do it. The far corner of a parking lot will do it. A window with a horizon in it will do it best of all, because the horizon is genuinely at infinity and there is no cheating there. The eye is not an art critic. It is an optical instrument obeying 1 divided by the distance, and beyond about 6 meters that fraction has shrunk down past the point where any lens in any shop could tell the difference. So the mercy is available to you in the dullest room in the plainest building. You need only find the longest line of sight the room allows and give your eye to it. Now some of you lying there might be thinking about the studies I laid out earlier, the ones that shrugged. You might be thinking, wait, if the experiment with 432 people found that the ones following the rules scored 10.8 and the ones ignoring it scored 10.3 and the statisticians said that gap is nothing, then why are you still telling me to look at the wall? And that is exactly the right question, and I want to answer it honestly, because I promised you honesty over comfort. The study did not test the physics. The study tested the rule. Those are not the same thing. The rule is a small dose delivered on a schedule 20 seconds every 20 minutes, and that small dose comes out to about 1 6/10% of your looking time spent at rest. The physics says the rest works. The experiment says that particular tiny helping of it, measured across people who mostly did not even follow it, does not move the needle you can measure with a questionnaire. Both of those can be true at once. A single glass of water does not cure thirst you have built over a whole day of walking in the sun. That does not mean water is a myth. It means the dose was wrong. And when you set the doses side by side, the arithmetic almost tells the whole story by itself. The little rule offers 1 6/10% of your time. The work on holding the eye at distance to actually slow the drift toward nearsightedness points at something more like 5 full minutes in every hour, and 5 minutes in 60 is 8 3/10%. That is roughly 5 times as much. 5 times. If a gardener told you a plant needed an hour of sun and you gave it 12 minutes, you would not be shocked when the plant sulked. You would not conclude that sunlight is a fraud. You would conclude you had been stingy without meaning to be. The 20-second glance was never wrong in direction. It was wrong in size. It pointed the eye at the horizon and then yanked it back before the spring had finished closing. I want to sit with the atropine a little longer too, because it is the cleanest proof we have that the mechanism is real, and I find something almost eerie in it. Here is a chemical that has been dripped into human eyes for a very long time, first to make the pupil grand and dark, and, people once thought, more lovely. And what that same chemical does, chemically, is walk up to the receptors on the ciliary muscle where the calming nerve, the parasympathetic nerve, would normally deliver its message to squeeze, and it blocks the doorway. The message arrives and finds the door locked. The muscle, hearing nothing, does the only thing an unaddressed muscle can do. It relaxes. The lens goes flat. The eye falls into its distance shape and stays there, whether you are looking at a far hill or a book held under your nose. The book will be a blur, because you have chemically removed your power to focus close, but the muscle is at rest. Now hold that picture next to the picture of you looking out a window. When you send your gaze to the horizon, you are not blocking any doorway with a drug. You are simply removing the reason the calming nerve was firing in the first place. There is no near thing to focus on, so there is no order to squeeze, so the muscle lets go. The end state is the same as the drug's end state. A flat lens, a relaxed ring, an eye at its birth shape. One path gets there by jamming the lock with a molecule, the other gets there by taking away the errand. And this is why I keep calling the horizon the free version of the medicine. It reaches the identical resting place that pharmacists reach with a bottle, and it costs you nothing, and it wears off the instant you look back down, which is exactly what you want, because you would like to keep your power to read. There is a further gift hiding in this, and it is a gift for the people who worry about growing older. For a very long time, the story people told about aging eyes was a story of a failing muscle. The idea was that the ciliary muscle simply wore out, grew weak, gave up its grip, and that was why a person of 50 could no longer read the fine print and held the newspaper at arm's length as if trying to push it into the next room. It is a sad story, and it turns out to be, in its main claim, wrong. The newer evidence says the muscle keeps much of its strength deep into old age. It can still contract. It still tries. What changes is the lens itself. Over the decades, the proteins inside the crystalline lens link up and pack together, and the whole little disc grows stiff like a gummy candy left out on the counter until it will no longer bend. So the muscle pulls its release, the way it always did, and the lens, being stiff, refuses to spring into its fat near shape. The command is fine. The organ receiving the command has hardened. That is presbyopia, and it is why the amplitude, the total focusing range, which stood near 10 diopters in a healthy person of 20, has slid down below a single diopter by the late 50s and early 60s. At 50, you have perhaps half a diopter left, which puts your nearest clear point out around 2 meters, farther than your own reaching arm can hold a page. I tell you this not to sadden you, but because it clarifies what the distance gaze is and is not doing for you. When you look at the horizon, you are not exercising the muscle to keep it strong, the way you might do curls to keep an arm strong. That is not the mechanism, and I do not want to sell you a false one. You are doing the opposite. You are giving the muscle permission to stop working. The value is in the rest, not in the effort. And that is worth understanding, because it means the enemy was never weakness. The enemy across your whole screenlit day was sustained, unbroken, unfelt tension. The clench that never gets a gap. The pinch held so long the fingers forgot they were pinching. And there is one more actor I have circled a few times and want to name plainly now because it complicates the tidy picture and honesty demands it. When the myopia numbers climbed and people looked for what was protecting children who did not go nearsighted, the answer that came back most strongly was not less reading, and it was not the little breaks. It was outdoor light. There was a program in Taiwan that simply pushed young children outdoors for 2 hours a day, and over 2 years the share of nearsighted preschoolers fell from 15.5% down to 8.4%, almost cut in half. And that finding does something uncomfortable to my neat little story about relaxing a muscle at the window. It suggests that part of what saves the growing eye is not only the far focus, but the sheer flood of bright outdoor light itself, working through the eye by some chemistry we are still piecing together, doing something to slow the very stretching of the eyeball that turns a child nearsighted for life. So I will not stand here and pretend the wall across the room is the whole medicine. Inside, the horizon gaze buys you the rest of the muscle and the flattening of the lens, and that is real and free and yours. But the fuller mercy, especially for a young and growing eye, is the door itself. It is stepping out under the open sky, where the light is 100 times what your ceiling gives you, and the far things are truly far. The muscle unclenches either way. The eyeball, it seems, wants more than that. It wants the sun.